wants to take your seats, we're going to start. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of September 8th, 2020. This meeting is called to order. Roll call is, Councilmember Tomachoff was here a second ago. Well, I'll go ahead and call roll call, and hopefully she'll come in. Councilmember Eldama, Councilmember Clark, Councilmember Hugh, Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Vice Mayor. Yeah, I'm present. Councilmember Tomachoff, I don't see her anywhere. When she comes back in, I know she's here. When she comes back in, would you take note that she is present? Actually, she's coming through the door, I think, right now. Councilmember Tomachoff, were you present? Very good, thank you. Okay, moving on. Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item number 1?
Glendale Works Program Update.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here today to talk to item number 1 is our Community Services Director, Jean Marino.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about Glendale Works and to provide a program update. As you know, this program has been growing within our community for several years now, and I'm excited to have our partners here with us to talk about the program, specifically the outcomes that have been accomplished over the last 3 years, and the impacts that the program has had here in our community. And so joining me for today's presentation is Gisani Goodman, Director of Community Engagement with Phoenix Rescue Mission, and Nathan Smith, our Chief Program Officer. And so with that, I will turn the presentation over to our guests.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you guys to let you know something of what the Glendale Works program is about and what we're planning to do with it as we move forward. As you can see on the slides there, the Glendale Works program is meant to be an innovation in the area of homeless outreach. The idea is when we're trying to work with individuals living on the streets, you've got to find some ability to motivate them, to inspire them to seek solutions for themselves. And there's a bunch of different things that you can do to get there. Oftentimes in the past, we've used things as simple as a water bottle, a hygiene pack, and a smile to get a conversation started so that we can learn something about the story of the individual that we're facing, find out what their barriers are, their goals and dreams are, and work with them from that standpoint. The big innovation that Glendale Works brings to the table is that instead of a hygiene pack, or even some of our more sophisticated ones these days, like an ID voucher or things of that nature, Glendale Works uses as its tool for motivation a work shift. It means that people, first and foremost, are investing in their own solutions by coming out and providing some of their own sweat equity to the city of Glendale's parks and facilities. And what it does is it instills a sense of dignity. It's less of a top-down sort of patron-client relationship and more of a person doing for themselves right at the very beginning of their outreach. So if you can imagine, instead of receiving a hygiene pack, you get the opportunity to work for 5 hours to earn a minimum wage rate pay. And what I think is really underrated is the endorphins that come from working all day long really put people in a good mood, and it opens up the door for us to have this conversation. So that the Glendale Works program is really about finding the right way to get ourselves toward tangible outcomes for individuals, but create a win-win scenario where the community is benefiting as well. So it's not just that people on the streets are getting served, but the parks are looking nicer, the area around the landfill is looking nicer, and things like that.
So when it comes to the actual program, we start off with what you see here. So basically, we want it to not just be day labor opportunity, but meaningful work. And by doing that, we want to be able to increase interaction. So basically, the amount of times that we're actually able to communicate with that individual, as in Nathan was saying, with a water bottle, a bag of hygiene, just a conversation of I acknowledge you as a person and I want to get to know you and I want to know if you need help. I want to be able to help address your needs. And that leads to building the trust, building rapport with the clients, building rapport with the people who are out there who might be interested in our services. And then it introduces the supportive services. So we engage them to ultimately come to that goal of housing and job placement. So a lot of people always ask, how does this program work? What is it that you do? And fortunately, how has it been successful? Which we feel that it definitely has. So you see there in step one, it's basically just the day labor aspect of it. So they're doing basic landscaping, trash removal. We're now at the landfills. So we not only just serve the parks department, but we also serve the landfill department as well. Step two, so basically accruing those day labors by creating community awareness amongst the homeless population in Glendale, letting them know about the fact that they can come out and as long as they're experiencing homelessness in this city, they can participate in the activities and then be able to receive payment. They also receive a meal and they also receive transportation to the job site. So we actually have a pickup location, which is literally just a stone's throw away from here. And we pick them up and we transport them to the job site. And then we transport them back to where the pickup location was at the end of the shift. And the shift is a 5-hour shift. And at minimum wage, they get $60 for working 5 hours in the project. The next step is for case management. So, you know, the coordinator that is out there, which you'll see a picture of him here shortly, he definitely is building that rapport with them throughout the day. So even though they're out there, you know, working, picking up trash, shoveling things up and picking weeds or whatnot, he's out there talking with them to ask them, what other needs do you have aside from getting this, you know, these $60? What more can we connect you to? And we actually have the ability to hold a contract with the city for emergency solutions where we actually have a navigator who's actually able to provide case management services to them. So this case manager will pull up to the job site along with the coordinator and offer them services and speak to them about change. And then that leads to the fourth step, which is actual skills. What does this individual need in order to be successful moving forward? And that's the job placement, the job obtainment piece of Glendale Works, which is obviously the goal. And then this here is Gabe. So this is what a typical day looks like. As I described earlier, you know, people get scheduled for a shift. They get picked up at First United Methodist, do a little bit of paperwork, have a quick breakfast, go out and start working. And then we partner with the city to make sure that our projects are complete. And then we transport them over to receive their payment and then take them to the pickup site where ultimately their day is over. So outcomes, I'm sure a lot of you want to know, well, how successful has this program truly been? So 350 unduplicated participants. So these are individuals who are experiencing homelessness in your city and have come and participated in our program, 350 unduplicated. And that shows you out of those 350, then you'll see some duplicated numbers because people can come out and participate again. So 2,439 shifts. So those are the shifts in total that everybody has been able to come out and work in. And then out of those shifts, first come, interactions, which is 2,572. So that's the amount of people that we have been able to talk to about the program, and then they come out and work a shift. And then lastly, the hours of labor in the 12,000s, which is really, really great. And all of that results into the actual outcomes, which is 34 placements for jobs, housing placements, and by housing placements, it could either be a residential program internally with Phoenix Rescue Mission, an external residential program, or permanent housing, and that was 72. And then we did 206 cleanup projects with the city of Glendale in the Parks Department. So 206 projects. And what you'll see here now is just a few pictures in the next few slides that kind of go over where you can see the progress of the projects that we go out and do with our participants. And this here is in a retention area on 83rd and Bethany. And as you can read at the header, you know, repeated interactions inspire change. We really, really believe that. Like Nathan was saying, it is really, really interesting to see what a little bit of dignity will do when you obtain your wage that will actually drive someone to ask, you know, what more is there out there for me? And that's such an important aspect of this program, is that the dignity is restored and people want to do something different. Those are just some pictures. That's our Glendale Works van. And we have a video for you now.
Out on the streets and in Glendale, in the parks, kind of like at the end of our wits, like wondering where we're gonna go next.
When I first got pregnant, we were homeless, and it was very scary. Not sleeping really, you know, because there would be times like people would come up on us, like, but I don't know. Just hoping to make it.
We've kind of exhausted all the resources in that area, like, so we didn't know anything else that would help us. And then they told us about Glendale Works, a program where for then 50 days, for $50 a day, you could work, put in 4 hours a day and get cash at the end of the day. And we were like, that really would help us. There was nowhere else that was providing any like income or any help with income. So we went for it. Along comes this program we never heard of, and they're like, hey, we can provide you with like housing help or hygiene help or, you know, somewhere to just get cleaned up and stuff. And we're like, okay. So we went after it. We usually get up at like 3:30 in the morning, and we try to like clean ourselves as best as we can, you know, within the circumstances. And we go to the work area where Gabe would come with the van like at what, 5? We'd be there at 5:30, something like that.
Our first day was rough. We were tired, worn out, but as soon as we were done with our day, we went to a hotel, got a hotel room, we showered, and we slept.
You know, we worked the program, we did what we were supposed to do, showed up to work, made inquiries about any other help they could provide, and they helped us. So right here, this is the outcome of trusting them. You know, we have somewhere to live after being homeless for like 3-4 years straight. You know, this has been a good beginning of the year. This is the first time in a long time we've had this long of a stretch together in somewhere. It helped validate me a little bit that I could finally help provide some help for both of us. So it helped me, you know, help build the self-esteem and stuff. And it felt good.
Thank you for the help. You know, no, we weren't the easiest to work with, but I'm glad we were given a chance. And I'm glad that, you know, with finally being given that chance, that we did stick with it, because it does help.
Could set goals now and have a realistic like outlook on achieving them, as opposed to just a pipe dream. So
Still stress, but a new stress and a better stress. You know, it's nice to actually have food when we get hungry.
it provides hope again. You know, it's hope. It works for you as hard as you work for it, and it's a real trusted avenue to make it happen. It's not just a dream. It can come true.
There's a lot of stories like you see from Evol and Jennifer. There are a lot of people who have used this program to create a story similar to what you see there. I think the important thing that I would point out is that we were, one, ready and present when they were motivated with the thing that would help them keep going. And two, as they wavered in their commitment, as their circumstances potentially forced them into a state where they thought they would want to give up, we continued to be there, and we continued to provide the opportunities. And the right mix of timing and resources helped them achieve a situation where their baby was born indoors and was not born into homelessness and is not now another kid in the DCS system. And I could go down through the cascading list of social problems that you see solved in just this one family right here. But what you see is something that's now multiplied. And because we're expanding Glendale Works, it's going to be multiplied exponentially. So we're looking at 75%. There's been 75% growth over 3 years. And this is huge. It's not always that more equals better, right? Like there's not always a direct correlation. And I'm a parent, so I'm constantly telling my kids more does not always equal better. Sometimes more equals a whole lot worse for any number of reasons. But in this case, more often is better. So for one, more interactions with individuals means more opportunities to inspire and motivate them to seek the change that they're after. Also, more resources for this gives us the ability to help more individuals more frequently. So more participants, more interactions are going to result in more placements. Placements in things like full-time employment, substance abuse treatment, which is critical out here, behavioral health services, and the other things that you see up there, not least of which is reconnecting with family members. So for us, what it means to have success means lives are being changed. Ultimately, we're hoping to see a reduction in homelessness in the city of Glendale. There are a lot of other factors that tie into that, but we definitely know we will be absolutely doing is one individual or family at a time creating change for them and solving the problem of homelessness for them. So we thank you, City of Glendale, for your investment in this project. It's been very fruitful. We expect it to continue to be so, and it's just been a lovely partnership with you all. Thank you very much.
So with that, at the second workshop in October, we'll be coming forward and talking about the homelessness initiatives update on a whole. This is just one program that is funded out of community revitalization. And so we thought it was important to bring this to you. You had asked when we spoke to you about next year's action plan back in May. So we thought it was important that you could hear the story directly from the people who are delivering the service. As you know, there is an amount of unfunded unallocated emergency solutions grant funding that still has to be, determined how that's going to be invested, and that will be part of the conversation that we'll have in October as far as council's priorities regarding those investments. But with that, we would be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the Glendale Works program.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jane, and our guest. Excellent presentation, very uplifting and heartwarming. It's, I think, exactly the kind of results we were hoping for this program. On slide 13, where we talked about substance abuse treatment, behavioral health services, Social Security, benefits restoration, and reconnection with family. So these are some of the additional benefits to the program that make a difference. Have we quantified those? Do we have any numbers to go with those results? And if we haven't been doing it yet, is it something that could be added into the program so that we could track how many behavioral health referrals there are, or drug treatment referrals, or people who have left the program because they've been reconnected with their family and have, ended their homelessness that way, whether they did it here locally or whether they moved out of state to be with family? Do we have any numbers to go with those results?
Yes, we do. So we do track the type of placement. We call it a service type. So if they accepted to come into a residential program, whether it be with Phoenix Rescue Mission or externally, we track that, as well as we track if they were permanently housed. And that means that we actually help have them become housed ourselves, and we've worked towards that with them. But if it happened thereafter and we, lost connection with that, then we don't have that number. But if we actually assisted them in doing that, yes, we do track that.
Okay, thank you. And I know I would be interested in seeing those numbers and seeing how they develop over time as well, assuming that we do continue funding this program. So if you could work with Ms. Moreno on that, that would be great.
Absolutely.
The other question I have, Mayor, if I may, if members of the council or staff or members of our community have suggestions on other types of projects that the individuals involved in Glendale Works could undertake in our community, how would they forward that?
Mayor and Councilmember Turner, we'd be happy to, take information from you if you know of other projects that need to be done. Currently, we're focused on, the parks. We get a lot of our projects from the parks, but if there are other things that you're aware of, we can certainly, look to see if they can be programmed in.
So take them to Eugene?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned that, you've had a pretty significant growth rate, which is excellent in the program. My question is, are we meeting, is there a pent-up demand out there for this particular program? In other words, are you having people wait to be able to get into the program? How is that working?
Yes, we do. We actually have a lot of individuals that we turn away. So at the pickup location in the morning, we do have individuals that are pre-scheduled. That means that we actually sign them up to come out and work with us ahead of time. Sometimes we're out by 2 weeks or 3 weeks as far as like signing individuals up. So in the morning, sometimes there's people who don't show up for one reason or another. So we actually have a crowd in the morning that are just waiting to be picked. We do track the number of participants that we turned away, so we do have that number as well. And we collect it monthly. And so by expanding the program and adding a second crew that now serves in the landfill department, we've actually been able to take more of those individuals who are interested in the program. And even after having 2 crews, we still have people who often are turned away because there's not enough slots per day.
Thank you. Mayor, if I may. One other question. You mentioned there were about 72 out of the group that had accepted housing or were able to move into housing. What are the main obstacles you find with individuals for not going to the next step of getting housed? What are you finding that the individuals are unable to get to that next step once they, are put on their feet a little bit with this program? Then why aren't we seeing a higher, even a higher percentage that are taking housing opportunities?
Yeah, so it really truly comes down to the individual. We work with the individual to build rapport and to actually break down the barriers that they're facing. And unfortunately, 2 of the largest barriers that we see is substance abuse and mental health. And so it's really coming to that place with that individual when they finally are ready. We like to think about it as the tyranny of the moment. When they're finally ready, we want to be able to be there and respond. And we're constantly talking with them as they're out there working with us. However, unfortunately, some people are just not ready yet. The claws of addiction are dug in deep. And it's having to come to that place where that individual finally says, you know what, I think I'm done. I've reached rock bottom. And Phoenix Rescue Mission takes pride in being there when that individual is ready. So for us, even though there are a lot of individuals that have not come to that, point to make that decision, we take pride in being there as soon as they're ready and what we call continuous engagement. continuously talking to them, continuously offering services to the point where we're beating them over the head about everything that they can possibly obtain by just asking for help, and then just being there whenever they're ready to say that they're done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I have several questions. Someone mentioned crews. How many people do you use per day in this program?
So in the program, we have 2 crews. Originally, it was 1 crew, and now we have 2. And at the moment, we run for 10 participants per crew, so a total of 20.
So you're doing 20 people per day? Okay.
Yes. And we increased that from 5 participants per
Okay.
day.
This is about your process. I had always learned, and I still believe it to be true, that when you talk about the homeless, about a third are what we call professional homeless, a third may be families that truly need help, and a third are either substance abuse or mentally ill. I'm sure some of your crew members may be professional homeless, that category of professional homeless. How many people, or no, I asking the number is not right. Do you have people that are professional homeless that repeatedly take advantage of the program to pick up that $50 a day, and then you might not see them for a week? Maybe they only come once a week. Do you have that kind of situation occurring within the program?
Yes, definitely. And I think that's part of the reason why there's not just this sky-high percentage of placements, is because, this program does oftentimes engage the most difficult people to get off the streets, the so-called, using a HUD term, chronically homeless, which means that they have a disabling condition and they've either been homeless frequently or homeless for a long time. So when those factors are present, these individuals are considered chronically homeless. Those are notoriously difficult people to keep motivated to get off the streets. And we see a lot of those people who come out in Glendale Works. The lion's share of the people who work with Glendale Works would probably fall into that category. So they are very difficult to place. You do run into issues where you know that there are people who are trying to take advantage of you. So we put some sort of like mitigating things in place. So there's a conversation. First conversation that we'll have with someone when they first sign up is, hey, this isn't just meant to be a day labor program. We're actually trying to get people off the streets here. That's actually the goal. So we're going to be talking to you about things that we can do with you to help get you out of this situation. Also, as shift number, and it's almost, I don't want to say arbitrary, but we came up with shift 10 as a crossover point, because at that point they cross into a different tax situation, basically. So right before that's coming, we start having the, hey man, we're going to have to put you way back on the back of the list if you're not going to be willing to do something more than just come out here and do day labor services. It doesn't mean that they'll be fully cut off, but they will absolutely be deprioritized until they start to show new higher levels of motivation than where they're at now. So we can't absolutely get away from that because of the population we serve, but we can definitely mitigate it, and that's some of the things that we do to do so.
You are a mind reader, because that is where I was going, was, you know, how many shifts could a person work? I mean, I look at 350 participants and over 2,300 work hours. That seems like these people are repeating time after time after time, and you're not getting anywhere with them. So I think you answered that question very well. Thank you. I had one other question. Let's see if I can read it. Oh, yeah. You say it's a 5-hour workday, but I noted on the video that the gentleman referred to a 4-hour workday. So is it 4 hours or is it 5 hours? Or do you count during the time when they get their meal as part of that work shift? And what are the hours? Do they get there at 5 o'clock? What do they work from 6 to 11 or noon, or how is that day set up?
So I noticed the same thing, and I was like, hey, it's not 4 hours, it's 5 hours. So there was just a misstatement, basically. But it is a 5-hour shift. There is time in there for eating lunch, but it's not included in the 5, right? So
Okay.
it's like they're out there for 5.5 hours, and they're usually on site 6 o'clock and maybe 6:30 on the outside, and they're working for 5 hours plus meal time from that point.
Okay,
So I actually just took that to be a misstatement.
okay. I mean, I think it's a great program. I'm certainly in favor of an expansion of the program. But I just want to make sure that we're reaching as many people as we can, and we're not providing a resource to what I call the chronic or professional homeless that will take advantage of it, because your ultimate goal is really to help people, to move them to the next step. And so I agree with Councilmember Turner. I would like to see, you have the data, I'd like you to share it with us and tell us more about your success stories. Out of those 350, you gave us some basic, very basic information. Out of those 350, 34 had job placements, 72 housing placements. That's 100 people. What happened to the other 250? Are they part of that chronic homeless population? So I have more questions, and I think they might be answered with whatever data you can provide.
And I will say on that, we're absolutely not trying to enable people. Philosophically, Phoenix Rescue Mission never wants to enable people. When you see some of those repeats, there are people who will be climbing into the 20s in terms of how many shifts they've worked. Some of those are really, really good, and some of those aren't so good. So they're mixed in that data set there. Sometimes people, like the folks you saw in the video, might let their shifts climb, but they're actually using their money for a purpose. And so in those cases, because they're leveraging the program to get off the streets and not just to earn money, get another motel, buy some more drugs, and then worse, they're actually using the funds the way they're meant to be. We'll let those shifts climb. So a lot of what you see there are people actually saving a little cash and working to get themselves sustainable from the jump.
Do you have data that differentiates between more of a success story, like with this couple, as opposed to those who, for want of a better term, are just using the system for their 10 shifts? Do you make a differentiation in the data that you provide?
We don't on an ongoing basis, but the data is tracked, so we could look at it. We track data on who's obviously using the services and how often, and we track data on success stories. So we could correlate that set, but we don't look at it like that on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a little too far away, I think. I have a question on the screening process. I mean, and very smart. I think it's a great program, but what I don't want us to be doing is attracting homeless from other areas to be coming into Glendale. Is there any kind of screening process? Or, I mean, obviously, these people don't have a residence where you can say, what's your address? But how do we know that we're not bringing more homeless into Glendale with the program? Is there a process there? Do you ask people a few questions? Or how do we know that they're not taking the bus here from Phoenix or someplace to participate?
Yes, so we do ask them if they have resided, technically, we say resided in the city of Glendale, even though we know that they are homeless, but basically that they are experiencing homelessness in the city of Glendale. And so we do screen that to begin with. And then we also have the ability to be able to see where people have contacted services based off of a database as well, if we needed to do further, verification. But we do use that as part of our screening to be able to sign individuals up for a shift. So when they call the number asking where they are experiencing homelessness is actually the very first question that we ask them in order to be able to verify that they are indeed homeless in the city of Glendale.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, if I could, I have a few more questions. So looking at the numbers, it looks like basically, this is kind of along the lines of Councilmember Clark, is that the average number of shifts, somebody, based on 350 and 2,439 shifts, is 7 shifts. So I'm sure probably there's a lot of them that are completing the 10 shifts, because I know they can't make more than $600. So there's probably quite a few that are completing far fewer than 7 shifts, if that's what the average number is. So obviously, I mean, we want to have repeat engagement, and I understand that, but is there some point where you let somebody else have a chance? So somebody, I mean, like you said, if somebody shows up once a month or every other week, or I don't even know, is this a 5-day-a-week endeavor, or what days do they put the van out?
So we operate 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday.
Okay. And they pick them up at 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m.?
Yes, so we have earlier shifts in the summer, and then we just go back an hour during the winter time.
Okay. And Mayor, if I could, on average, how many people are waiting that don't actually get to go to work that day?
It really does vary, but on average, you could see anywhere between 5 to 10 individuals a day. But it really does vary depending on, whether it really changes from day to day. But we do see about an average from 5 to 10.
Okay. So when you say you're able to, once you get their name and know who they are, you're able to see where they've connected with services. But I mean, we don't have a shelter in Glendale, so obviously if they need shelter, they've been using shelter, they'd have to go someplace else. So I obviously wouldn't want to eliminate those people. But are they asked, for example, where have you been sleeping the last week or so? Were you in a park in Glendale? Where have you been residing in Glendale? Just because, like I said, the only thing that I think it's a fantastic program. I just don't want to increase our homeless problem in Glendale because people are migrating here because of this program. So.
No, absolutely, yes. We do ask them. Part of, the verification process is not just asking, are you homeless in the city of Glendale, but more importantly, are you homeless? And so we're asking them, where did you, a common question actually, for the coordinated entry system, the bigger system at hand, is to ask, where did you reside the night prior? And most times, if they are homeless in the city of Glendale, like you said, there's no access to shelter. Mostly all of them are answering the question by a place not meant for human habitation, which means that it's the street, whether it be a park, a bus bench, or wherever. So as long as somebody fits that criteria, then we're signing them on for a shift. And then the other part of your question, or that you were commenting earlier, was in regards to giving other participants an opportunity to come out. And that is definitely something that we do. Like Nathan was saying, we do assess if individuals are actually interested in making a change. That is something that is stressed very highly by our coordinators, is, are you interested in doing something? We've actually had to tell some people you can't come out for a little while because you're not interested in doing anything. So that has definitely happened, and we place those types of controls not only to give opportunities for other people to come out, but also to be able to, kind of give them that shove of, if you're going to want to come out, we're really going to have to talk about you wanting to do something different. And so we definitely set the stage, and we're very transparent about that with our clients, is to let them know that this is definitely a program about change. So if you want to participate, we really want you to be interested in something like that. We know people are not interested in that maybe the first time around or the second time around, but with continuous engagement and keeping that hard line, most people actually end up just okay, Tell me what to do. I want to get out of this situation. I surrender. Tell me what you'd like. You know, what's the best course of action for my situation? And then we can start working with that individual to do that. And for the individuals who are outside, who have been turned away, we look to see who hasn't participated before. And we're going to choose you first. If you've never come out before and you're a brand new face to the program and somebody did a no-show, we're going to go ahead and we're going to ask you to come out first, and we're going to prioritize that person for that shift.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one more, and thank you. I am very happy that Phoenix Rescue Mission has partnered with us on us, because I know, I mean, these are human beings. They deserve dignity. I don't want to sound callous about saying we don't want to, but honestly, the homeless problem in our country is so massive and so great. I just don't want to exacerbate the problem that we have here in Glendale, because that's where we're working. So I don't want to sound heartless and cruel, because these people are human beings. They deserve dignity. And Phoenix Rescue Mission, I know you guys have criteria, and that people have to actually be wanting to move forward in order to participate in your program. So I appreciate that. I do have one other question, though. I saw the job placements is around 10%, and I don't know if that's average. I guess what I'd really like to know is, I understand some of the issue probably is addiction, mental illness, and people who just aren't able to actually work a regular job. But is that a decent number, or are there not enough jobs to place the people in, or where does that number? What is your opinion of what that 10% is? What does it represent?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So first off, you're my council member, so it's great to talk to you personally. That number has always been disappointing right from the get-go, to be perfectly transparent. And it's one of these things that's really hard to verify, so you can take this how you will, but it's what we believe is a lot of people get jobs and we just never hear from them again. And we hear about that, so we know stuff like that happens, where people basically self-resolve their issues, especially when they get resources like what we provide here at Glendale Works. But it's hard, it's obviously impossible to quantify, because we won't put it down unless we have it specifically verified with that individual. So my first off, I would say my absolute hunch is that there's far more than 34 people. It's just 34 that we can verify. And on top of that, it is difficult for individuals to get employment, especially at the stage that we're working with them. So a lot of times what can happen is someone can get into housing because we want to get them off the streets and in a place where they can more comfortably, maybe more successfully go locate an employment opportunity. It's hard to show up to a job interview sweating buckets and looking homeless and feel like you're going to have the confidence to get the job. So we do place people in housing before they get employment. And then thereafter, they get employment, but we've discharged them at this point because they've been placed. And so those are things where that number is definitely higher than what you see there. We just report who has verified jobs while participating specifically in Glendale Works. And so that's the number you see. I do feel, though, that one of the things that can balance that out is more robust reporting on some of these other factors that can show activity that people are performing that includes getting jobs, but is not so exclusive to that point. So to Councilmember Turner's point earlier, I think that would be a really good data set to display more. And that tells the story when you add jobs in together collectively a lot better than looking at any one item by itself.
So, Mayor, just thank you for that. I mean, and I'm sure it was difficult enough before with COVID. A lot of the entry-level jobs in places where you might have been able to place some of these people, probably there's far less availability of that type of employment. And I mean, I feel really strongly this is a great program, but it's a stepping stone to housing, employment. I mean, this is a way to get people moving ahead. Yep. So that's what I've always been curious about, is what is the transition? Do we work with St. Joseph the Worker and other places? Because eventually these people need stable employment in order so they don't become homeless again. So that's always been my curiosity, is what do we do? $600 is fantastic, but it's certainly not life-changing. It's just a way to get people moving forward so that we can, they can find gainful employment, or they can get on, SSI or whatever the issue is that they need to get them housed and off the street.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those things are there. We do work with, we have our own workforce development program that's based out of Hope for Hunger. And so we connect people with that or whatever else might work for them, so they can do everything from even work toward getting a GED high school diploma on site with us to learn life skills, or job skills and things of that nature. So yeah, that stuff is really important to us, and we're using, again, these resources as opportunities to help people improve and grow while we have them, because we won't always have them. Glendale Works is an important part of a continuum of care, but it is a part. And so we just want to empower that to be the best possible part it can be, which is why these other services are there. But we do have to leverage other community resources in order to ultimately land at the goal for the individuals we serve.
Thank you, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple comments. Councilmember Talmachoff actually raises a excellent question on whether we're serving Glendale homeless or not, and I just want to share a little bit what I know about that. So the residency for a homeless individual is based on their established domicile, right? So wherever they spent the night that night. If it's in Glendale, then they're a Glendale resident. No different than the McKinney-Vento law, correct? So you can attend any school. What's your domicile? It's where I slept that night. You're coming to school here, then we'll pick you up. And so it's a really challenging thing, because we're probably serving Phoenix, Avondale, Litchfield, et cetera. The minute you ask them, where did you spend the night at? And it's in Glendale, then. So good to hear. Great question, but great to hear that you're serving them anyway. So thank you very much for that, because that is that's the definition of residential or a residency for a homeless. And then I wanted to add that I've had not a lot, but I've had residents and a couple business owners say to me that the program's not working, it's not ending homeless. Well, I don't know the program to be a solve-all. This is what's going to cure homeless. It's a long-term program that's going to help. We talked about giving back dignity to individuals. I think that's exactly what we do, and if we can continue to do that, I am extremely supportive of the program. But I just want those who are listening and those who have spoken to me that it's not working. It was never designed, folks, to end homeless. There's a whole different reason behind it, and I don't know that we'll ever resolve it, but this is a great program helping really good people that just got off on a bad, maybe not a start, but in the middle of their life, they've had a hard time. And so thank you. This is a great partnership. You guys do great work. You guys treat people with humanity and really humane way. And so I think it's a great program. I just want to make sure we all knew that the domicile piece is where you spent the night.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what our secret sauce is to hire people who know the game, right? So we have the Gabe who you saw has lived on the streets before. He has been homeless. He's been in prison before. I'm not saying anything he wouldn't proudly stand up and say, here's what I've overcome. And so we catch a lot of nonsense just because we've got savvy people there. And quite frankly, you're right to be concerned. There is a pull factor. I'll be honest with you, transparently. There's a pull factor to the city of Glendale because you can go get a day labor job. In other places, there's push factors because the criminalization of homelessness is stronger in other cities than it is in Glendale. And so kudos to Glendale for that. But it does push people to the city of Glendale, or pull people, if you will. So we've definitely turned away, Gabe's definitely turned away several people who he just absolutely knows did not stay in the city of Glendale, which does then mean that people have gotten through. So back to the point, we can't solve that problem. We can just do our level best to mitigate it as much as possible. I'd like to play the percentage. I'm not a gambler. I like to play the percentages. Gambling kills you. So we just try to bring the number down as much as possible. And I think we've done pretty well in that sense. And then as far as, like I said before, we are a part of the continuum, but not the continuum. So Glendale Works will never solve the problem of homelessness for the locale. There's going to be a lot of other things, like better behavioral prevention services is going to do more than an intervention service like Glendale Works to solve the problem of homelessness. One of the things, though, I would recommend your constituents thinking about is, do we have fewer people entering homelessness than exiting homelessness as the 0 point? And rather than just an absolute decrease. The idea is if our movement is positive, we're really getting somewhere. Glendale Works is meant to keep that movement positive. We're trying to get individuals off the streets, while on the prevention side, other services that the city is working with and the community has available are working to keep people from entering homelessness. So in terms of our part of the continuum, I think we're trying to say, are we effective on moving people out? And then on the prevention side, the city's asking, are we effective at preventing people from coming in? And both of those things need to be working in tandem for us to truly have the kind of success your constituency is looking for.
Nate, I was going to ask you to briefly talk about Gabe, and you sort of touched on it, but if you could just take a couple minutes and talk about Gabe, what he does and his position, and the fact that, he can call it as he sees it.
Yeah, first of all, Gabe is the man, and he will always call it as he sees it. He's the one person who's ever worked for me who actually gave me a performance evaluation at the end of the year, right? That's Gabe, right? Just, if this is it, this is what I'm saying. And so, like for me personally, I've never been homeless, never actually experienced any real poverty outside of like college. So I tend to negotiate with people, have sort of a softer approach. And you could probably slide a lot of nonsense past me, whereas with Gabe pinpoints it. But the guy loves you. You know the guy cares. You know he means business. He never doesn't show up. So you've got a guy who, again, he spent several years in homelessness. He spent years in prison. He's gone through a ton to rebuild himself. He actually went through Phoenix Rescue Mission's recovery program, lived with us for about 2+ years. Eventually got himself his own apartment because he got the job with Glendale Works. And now he's going back out to the streets because he sees people in a situation that he once was in himself. And when you come back with that standpoint, one, you're far more interested, more motivated to do the work. But again, like we've been saying, you can't get stuff past him. So this guy, man, Gabe, he's just really committed, and he's also excellent at the work that he does.
Okay, thank you. So 2 or 3 things I'd like, first of all, I'd like to thank the entire council for you guys trusting when I first brought this up 2.5, 3 years ago. The program's working, and one thing that wasn't discussed that I'm hoping that Gene may have the figures, the point in time count that we do for homelessness was released not too long ago, and I'm probably not going to get this correct, so hopefully you can correct me. But of all of the cities reporting homelessness, I think about 90% of them showed increases. Glendale is one of 3, I think, that actually showed a decent decrease. So your concern about people coming from other cities to Glendale may still be happening. I don't know. But I do know that the overall number of homelessness has actually dropped in Glendale. And so with that, I want to point out Jean Moreno. She came and talked with me about 3 weeks ago about this program, and I'm watching her face as she's talking, and even though I couldn't see her lips, I could see her eyes. She's taken a tremendous amount of pride in this program. She really, truly has embraced what she's doing right now. And Jean, I want to say publicly, I really appreciate what you're doing and how you've really, really taken hold of this project. If you have those numbers handy, if you could share those with everybody, that'd be awesome.
Mayor, I apologize. I do not have the point in time count numbers. That is going to be part of the discussion in October at the workshop.
Okay, but I am correct. We had 20-some people less homeless than the previous year.
That is correct.
Yeah, so I think it's working. And the one thing that I'd promised everybody, that this isn't something that the city of Glendale and Phoenix Rescue Mission by themselves can do. It takes a partnership with everybody. And that's something that Nate, when Jay Corey was with you guys, we all understood that thoroughly. It takes everybody, our community, our churches, a lot of different nonprofits. And And so we just have to keep that partnership up, because I think that's the only way we're ever going to solve this problem. We can't do it by ourselves. Anything else?
Yes, Mayor,
Go ahead.
just a couple of comments. Nate, I'm very impressed by you. You're articulate, you're bright, you're passionate, you're committed. They're very lucky to have you working for them. And I can
Thank
see
you.
you moving mountains in the future. And I also want to echo what the mayor said about Jean Moreno. Jean, you may have found your niche, I don't know. But just to see the difference in the results from the community revitalization department since you've taken over has been extremely impressive. And so I want to thank you for your passion and your commitment. You're doing an excellent job, and you're impressing everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we're finished with item number 1, if we could, were you finished? Thank you. Okay, if we could go ahead and move on to item number 2.
Council item of special interest, Visual Improvement Program.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide the staff report will also be our Director of Community Services, Jean Marino.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This item, the second item today, is a follow-up on a council item of special interest regarding the Visual Improvement Program that was raised by Councilmember Aldama in early 2019. For today's part of the presentation, Mr. Aldama, or Councilmember Aldama, had asked for an A to Z of VIP. So I will be covering a bit of the background and history, give you some information about some of the projects that have been done and some of the grant recipients, talk a little bit about the program administration and how it's worked over the years, and then the funding. But I would also like to seek some council consensus direction on a couple of things related to some unspent prior program years funding, which I'll talk about in detail when we get to that slide. And it's involving a proposed project regarding downtown cafe lighting. So the background and history, so thank you to the economic development team who had actually done a lot of research prior to my taking on this project. The VIP program, or some form of a commercial VIP program, has been in existence in the city of Glendale since, from what we can tell, the late 1980s. It's always typically been structured as a grant reimbursement program, which means that the individual who takes advantage of the program pays all of the costs up front and then can submit for reimbursement. In this case, it's been a 50% grant reimbursement program. It is intended to provide private property owners with an opportunity to rehabilitate dilapidated properties, or to just provide some, sprucing up, typically on the external of the property. This particular program falls in line with CDBG requirements because it is designed to eliminate or prevent blight, but it's also designed to encourage capital investment. So here are some pictures of some examples of projects that have been done over the years. The smaller projects like this were awnings for different businesses, exterior painting projects. We've had some larger projects related to some of the shopping centers along Glendale Avenue. And then, signage for a few different businesses. So here's just a summary listing of grant recipients. These are all businesses that have received 50% grant reimbursement over the last 10 years or so. You'll notice that there's quite a few familiar names there. So the program administration itself, so for a short period of time between 2007 and 2010, the program was administered by the city's marketing department. But for the most part, it's been operated by the Office of Economic Development, and it's definitely been run by them since about 2011. They have funded the VIP program, Visual Improvement Program, by applying through the CDBG grant application process. So basically, they would write up a grant request and go in front of the Community Development Advisory Committee every year, just like any other nonprofit would, and compete for those funds. So over the course of time, since 2011 and 2012, they have been awarded $461,000 in grant funds. And there's about $184,000 from 3 prior action plan years that is currently unspent, and that's one of the things that we will be talking with you about today. So a couple of the program challenges, when I worked in economic development, I had the privilege of meeting with property owners to talk about this program and how they could utilize the program. And it is challenging. And the biggest reason why it's challenging is because it does require property owners to have a significant amount of working capital because they do have to pay all of the costs up front. Additionally, there's, the city's contractual requirements, there's HUD requirements, and those things are just, the private sector is not typically accustomed to dealing with those things. A lot of times what we found is that the programs or the projects that they would want to use the program for could be done cheaper, so say as an example, landscaping. They could be done cheaper than having to use the prevailing wage requirements. That does tend to impact the cost for things like, that aren't construction-related type projects. So the last private property project that was completed under the Visual Improvement Program out of Economic Development was done in July of 2017. And then in 2018, they completed a public infrastructure project, which was the downtown alleyway lighting project. And we do have, as I mentioned before, old funding that needs to be expended. Which brings us to today. So when I was first asked to take over this council item of special interest, one of the things that we were looking at is we had a really big scope for the project. And so I revisited with Councilmember Aldama to talk to him about where we were at with this project and trying to conduct the feasibility and get us to a point to where we had a good cost estimate for this project. And so thanks to the work of Councilmember Aldama and Economic Development, we were able to come up with a more better defined scope. This project was originated from feedback that was received from the Downtown Stakeholders Group, which included some downtown business owners as well as the Chamber of Commerce. So that was kind of step one, is redefining what were we looking at with this project. This project is eligible for the fiscal year 18-19 CDBG funds. That allocation for that action plan year was $100,000. You'll see that the cost estimate's slightly more than $100,000, so we'll talk about that shortly. It did require the feasibility analysis and scope development, which is what I just previously described. So in partnership with engineering, they've worked really hard to help identify the feasibility and the potential for this project and come up with a proposed budget and timeline. So I just want to briefly talk about the departmental roles because this is a cross-functional, cross-departmental project. So essentially, economic development serves as the sponsor or champion for the project. They're typically the liaison for the downtown merchants group. Engineering provides the technical advisory services and project management for us, making sure that we know how much this is going to cost and that we're getting the right people to do the work, et cetera. And then community services, we're typically the funder, right? So this is a CDBG grant-funded program and project, and we make sure that we meet the regulatory oversight that HUD requires, et cetera. And then ultimately, somebody needs to own this project once it's completed. So we have worked with transportation to talk to them about this particular project. If it continues to advance and maybe even continues to expand in future years, is it something that they would be able to handle the ongoing maintenance and operation as part of the street lighting program? So here are just a couple of pictures. These are concept examples. These are not designs that we have gone out and asked somebody to design this project for us, but these are just photographs of existing projects that are out there, so you can kind of get a visual of what we're talking about with this lighting project. So in working with Councilmember Aldama and Economic Development and discussions with the Downtown Merchants Group, we redefined the scope of this project to start with a small one-block segment, 58th Avenue to 58th Drive. This makes the project a little bit more manageable, so that we understand kind of what we're getting into from a structural design perspective, et cetera, and it becomes scalable over time if needed. So obviously the benefits of this particular cafe lighting project, it addresses a stakeholder need that's been brought to us through the Downtown Merchants Group. It does focus on safety and beautification for the general area, but most importantly, it provides an area benefit, which is a little bit different than how we have run the visual improvement program in the past, where it was specific to improving one particular property. In this particular scenario, by investing in public infrastructure projects such as this, the city gets to control the timeline and make sure that it gets taken care of over time, which is a little bit different than some of those other projects. And again, it's scalable, so we could expand into the future, or we could say, you know what, this is really nice and it's done what it's been intended to do, which is beautify the area and improve safety and lighting. So with the feasibility assessment that engineering has helped us with, they basically have determined in conversations with the electric provider that the lights must be metered. So we have to tie into an existing metered source. So that could be meters at the park, it could be meters at the traffic signals, et cetera. The lights cannot hang below 16 feet over the street. Again, these lights are proposed to string across Glendale Avenue. We cannot attach to the decorative pedestrian lights, but would attach to the larger, taller street lights. We do need to evaluate structural engineering for those, just to make sure that the strength and load capability and what kind of reinforcements would be needed on those poles. And again, it's going to require some engineering and design consulting. And then the ongoing maintenance cost, transportation did advise that they would be able to roll this into their street lighting program. So the estimated project costs, we're estimating about $106,000 for one-time construction. It includes all of those things that I mentioned, the structural engineering and electrical engineering. The installation costs, which will be driven by the prevailing wage requirements. The assumptions that we made in coming up with this cost estimate is that we're assuming that there's no unusual or extensive sub-metering. And by that, it means like we can tie into an existing metered source, which we don't foresee that there's an issue with being able to do that. And then the standard fixture attachments without any modifications. The project would not be paying engineering admin fees or the arts fees. And we did assume a 25% contingency because this is the first project of this nature that we have endeavored, and we feel like it's important to make sure that we have a realistic potential cost. And then as far as the ongoing maintenance, we estimated based on like the downtown alleyway project, the maximum would be about $2,000 a year. And so transportation did feel like that was manageable. They'll evaluate that as part of the overall streetlight management program, which, they are handling the downtown alley lights and now this one. And so that will be part of their kind of ongoing budget review.
Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Before Jean continues on to the rest of the slide, if I can stop there. First of all, thank you to our staff for bringing this back. I know it's been a long time, but it's really one of those things where it was really worth the wait. I just want the council to know that this project was a really large project, was going to cost quite a bit of budget for it. Working with Jesse Peterson and Jim Moreno and some of the downtown merchants through the downtown manager, we were able to scale that back to reduce the cost. But I also want you to know that this lighting project will bring and attract people to downtown. That's what we need. We need more people to come to downtown. It'll also establish your arrival to downtown. People often say, well, when are you in downtown? Well, it's when you get past Grand Avenue, but the lights will really bring an ambiance to downtown, and that's exactly what we need for downtown to revitalize it and bring more folks down. So I just want you to know that the project was really lengthy. It was a huge undergoing, but working with our great staff, we were able to reduce that back and bring you a project that's at what I feel is a reasonable cost. and I think it'll bring more business to downtown and thus more taxes. And I won't be the one to quantify that. Maybe the city manager can, but I just want you to know that our staff worked really, really hard to get a really huge project and bring it back down and scale it where it's more manageable for the council. So thank you. And Jean, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. And, you know, like I mentioned before, when Economic Development applied for the grant funds in, for fiscal year 18-19 action, the CDBG action plan year, they did specify in their grant application for the VIP program, so the visual improvement program as we know it for private properties, but also for public infrastructure investment projects. So this particular project does fall in line with an acceptable use for that particular grant period. The amount that was allocated to them that year was $100,000. So it is, you know, the estimated cost is a little bit higher than that, but in the next slides, I'll talk a little bit. So the project phases, obviously, I talked a lot about, you know, the design and engineering and all of that. And so engineering is definitely our partner on this, but there are multiple phases to the project. We think that we may be able to shorten the timeline, but expect it to be 5 to 8 months. Our target completion would be April of 2021. And the reason why we need some consensus direction is not necessarily specifically for this project, but the two prior fiscal years, so 16-17 and 17-18, there's some unspent funding that will total 184 altogether that we think would be beneficial if we amended the action plans for those years to allow all $184,000 to be utilized for public infrastructure projects. Could be an expansion of this, it could be something different. What we would propose is bringing, if there's consensus direction from the council, we would, and we have some other plan cleanup that needs to be done anyway. We would bring those plans forward to council to adopt amended plans. And then after this project was completed, after we knew exactly how much it was going to cost, we could have a discussion with the council about how to invest the surplus funding that's left over from this 184. The conversation about public infrastructure investments is also going to be a part of a future workshop presentation when we start talking about investments for the 21-22 annual action plan. So with that, I would be happy to answer any additional questions that you might have, but I am looking for consensus on council's direction regarding bringing forward action plan amendments for future years that would allow all $184,000 to be spent on physical improvement type projects, but specifically looking to advance this cafe lighting project that we estimate to be about $106,000.
All right, I've got a couple of questions myself. I don't know, probably 5 years ago, I had actually had talked, I guess it hadn't been 5 years, pushing it, talked with the city manager and was telling him, I happened to be in Scottsdale the night before and seeing how they lit up the streets, and I really felt that was something that could be beneficial to us here. So I need to try to clarify, are we trying to help the businesses that are in downtown Glendale at the same time make people feel more comfortable and more safe and still have people sort of get excited that, hey, this is a new downtown Glendale? Is that sort of what you're trying to do, Mr. Aldama?
Mayor, thank you so much for the question. I won't say that it provides safety. I'll leave that to city staff, but absolutely yes. This kind of reborns downtown Glendale and demonstrates when you arrived. Our neighbor to the north has P83, and you know when you arrived because you can see it. Downtown Glendale, obviously you know when you arrive, but there's nothing there that's a wow factor, and this lighting project is going to provide that. And then again, as some of the results will be that we'll get more people here, more people into doors for our businesses, and that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, all right.
So.
And I'm not trying to mess anything up. I actually think it's a good idea. It's something I'd like to see done. I question why that particular spot, either not on 58th Drive across from the park where we have the new Mexican restaurant that just opened up in that area, or if we're really trying to encourage more businesses, maybe from 58th down to 57th, I think it is. In other words, one block further south. In my opinion, and I've been to a lot of towns, I've traveled every state in the United States. A lot of the smaller towns, the main thoroughfare wasn't what was lit up. It was typically one of the side streets off the main thoroughfare to entice people to pull in. I don't know as though you're going to get that same effect on Glendale Avenue, but I 100% believe that you could get that same effect just north of Glendale on 58th Drive. So just something to, I guess really question. If you're trying to help businesses, then maybe from 58th on Glendale down one more block going east, where you have businesses on both sides, it might benefit. I don't know. It's just some thoughts that I had.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That's actually a great question, great comments. Really, this was derived from the merchants in downtown, is why our economic development team and Gene Moreno, we met with the downtown management group and the merchants and said, hey, listen, because the proposal was from 51st Avenue to 59th Avenue. So we said, let's compress this thing. Can we do that? And the merchants that were in the room and the leadership group from the downtown manager group thought, you know what, yes, we can compress it, and the best place for it is on the main drag, which is Glendale Avenue. Maybe at a later date we can have another concept that are the side streets that you're mentioning of, but really it was derived from the merchants themselves to say, if we're gonna do it, it needs to be down the main drag, and it tells you you arrive. I think you can accomplish it by both ideas, but again, I wanna just make sure we all know that this really derived from the merchants. It's not Councilmember Aldama's plan, it's theirs. I'm just helping champion it. But you have a great point, but important to know that this has been driven by them.
Yeah, and I'm going to make one more statement, then I'll get to you.
Okay, just
I've
wanna make
noticed,
sure
I've
you saw
noticed
me.
you over there, yeah. So if nothing else, if we could at least get, okay, this is Plan A, and then what would be the expansion? What would be B? What would be C? What would be D? So we sort of have an idea of what direction, but I keep thinking a lot of the coastal cities, when you're driving down like Coast Highway 1, almost every one of those, when you go into the town, that's where you see their grand marquee and lights and everything. It's not on the main road as you're going by it. It's actually trying to entice you to come in. So that would be my main thing. If it's money that we should have spent that we didn't spend, that could help our businesses and kind of rebrand downtown Glendale a little bit, I do think it would help with safety. If you got more light, you have less chance of break-ins or that type of thing. So I think that could be a huge benefit. And with the LED lights, the cost being of electricity being so much less than what it was with incandescent just a few years ago, I think it's a great idea. I'd be in full support. I would like to see a follow-up as far as B, C, D. What would be the next ones that we would take on if it proves successful?
If I may just answer that question, and Gene Moreno may chime in, but you hit the nail on the head. So I mentioned that the project was requested from 5.1 to 5.9, and we reduced it down. So we thought that having a starting spot of where it is now, was it right in front of Cuff there going east, then the second segment would be from the subway intersection going towards La Perla and continue to 51st Avenue. But Gene, is that correct? Is that what we talked about?
Yeah, Mayor and Councilmember Aldama, and if I may, so engineering has assured me that we can start the project anywhere along that route. However, there is an abundance of electrical in the park that would likely make this first phase of the project easier. And so the ideal scenario is, kind of starting at one end or the other. And when the merchants came back and said, oh, we'd like to look at this particular block, that actually works better from a staff standpoint. Now, that being said, if there's direction to do something different, we can obviously go back and look at that. But there is an abundance of electrical in the park, which makes this an ideal point to start the project.
Right, and again, my thought about the park is there's no businesses on the park side. And on the business side, we only have about half the merchants there. So if it was one block further east, you have businesses on both sides. And that's all I was trying to look at is if we're going to start, we probably want to get the most bang for the bucks that we can.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm kind of wondering why we're not looking at 58th Avenue, because I think kind of what we're doing, we're going to do we were going to have music in, whatever it's called, live at Murphy Park.
Right.
In April. I think now we were talking about October. It doesn't look like that's probably going to, but anyway, we were looking at featuring the park as a focal point of downtown. So the idea to get people, Pioneer Square and other places around the country, is to get people to get out of their car. So if you're able to see the lights without getting out of your car, I don't know if we're actually accomplishing our purpose. If you're driving on Glendale Avenue and you see the lights on 58th Avenue, you're more likely to park somewhere and get out and walk, which is what we're trying to get people to do. So, and I know there's been a lot of work. Going all the way to 51st Avenue, I think that's probably, in my opinion, a little too far east. It's really getting away from our downtown. I do think that going as far as 57th Drive is probably a good idea, but I don't know why we're not going down 58th Avenue, because we're trying to make the park a focal point of our downtown. If we're going to be trying to do year-round events, and we don't have any businesses or anything in the park now, but that's not to say at some point in the future that may change. And I worry that if it's between what we're seeing here is that people are going to drive through it and they're going to just keep right on going, and that's not going to accomplish what it is we're trying to get people to do. We want them to park their car, get out, and walk, and enjoy the park, and go into the shops and restaurants. So at least we have an extra $78,000. Could we go around the corner to 58th Avenue and I don't know whether there's any cost savings in doing it all at once. If this is what the merchants think is a good starting point, to start at I'm getting the street names mixed up, 58th Drive to 58th Avenue, and then go north on 58th Avenue to Glen Drive and light that too, because I really honestly don't believe that lighting up Glendale Avenue right there is gonna, there's very few places to park there anyway. By the time you get there, there's no place to park. So people see it, they're gonna be like, I wanna go there. Most of those places that are lit up around the country are it's for pedestrians, which is much more suited for a side street than a main street. So we do have an extra, sorry, my phone is ringing, little over $78,000. If we're gonna do it, and if it's decided that it's gonna be this frontage on Glendale Avenue, it makes sense because it's the park, so that part of it makes sense to me if we're gonna feature the park, but couldn't we, if we had to, if it's $100,000, throw in another $22,000 on top of the 78 and go on 58th Avenue and light that up to Glen Drive too, and there probably is cost savings with doing it all as one project anyway. So I think, I agree with the mayor. I think there needs to be lighting off Glendale Avenue. The idea is to generate foot traffic. That's it for me.
Good.
Couple of things. I think it depends upon your goal. Is it to generate pedestrian traffic, or is the goal to delineate and identify where downtown Glendale begins? From the presentation, I got the impression that the goal was to rebrand and identify where downtown begins, which I think is a good idea because people are confused. They don't know exactly where downtown is. So I think that's the first discussion. What's the goal? But I wanted to ask Ms. Moreno a question. You listed all the project benefits. Were there any cons to doing this project? Any impediments or any rationale that would make the project perhaps not as enticing as it's been presented?
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, the biggest challenge and the hurdle was defining the scope. You know, where would we want this project to be? And then the second was making sure that we could tie into electrical without having to install meters. And because of both of those two things have been addressed, we don't foresee any challenges to the project or any drawbacks to doing the project. If it hadn't been for being able to make sure we could address the electrical, then this would be a different story. You might be familiar with one of the landscape median projects that's out off of Bell Road, west of the Loop 101. Like, that is individual metered trees in the middle of a median. That can be costly. And when we spoke with APS, they did, because we were wondering, could we just have an agreement with APS where we paid a flat rate? And they said, no, it would definitely need to be tied into a meter. So from that perspective, we don't see any downsides to moving forward with the project. Obviously, any type of a lighting project that will illuminate an area, especially at nighttime, we feel like can provide some enhanced benefits for the overall community.
Very good. I have one follow-up question. I'm not a techie, and I don't know if this is a valid question or not, but often in traveling to all different spots, from time to time, I will see, for example, caution, bridge height 21 feet. Which means if your truck is taller than 21 feet, you better not use that tunnel or that bridge. Is 16 feet going to be adequate to deal with the humongous truck? We get a lot of truck traffic on Glendale Avenue, and I'd hate to have a truck that's too tall take out a whole string of lights because they were 16 feet. So, I mean, that's a dumb question because I don't know, whether it's applicable or not, but have you all thought about that?
Mayor and Councilmember Clark, that is not my technical area, but I have been assured that 16 feet is the required, but obviously engineering and transportation would never allow us to do anything that, 16, yeah.
Mayor and Council, 15 feet is the minimum height, or that's the minimum height that these lights could go. So the maximum height any vehicle can go is 15 feet high. So these lights have a minimum requirement of being 16 feet. So they'll be at least 1 foot higher than the maximum vehicle height.
So would we at least put up a caution sign somewhere saying, truck traffic over 16 feet, use alternate route, or something like that? Because
Mayor and Council, no, because there's no vehicles over 16 feet unless they have a special permit, and if they have a special permit to transport anything, they have to have an approved route. So we wouldn't experience any conflict.
Okay, so no worries then.
No worries.
Okay, good. I support this project. It's probably long overdue. In terms of goal for me would be to identification of downtown Glendale and creating a stopping and starting point so that people recognize that they're in downtown Glendale. Because I really don't think the lights are going to magically increase sales tax for the city. I think that's unrealistic to even offer that as a proposition, but I think it can go a long way toward identifying where downtown Glendale is.
Any other comments?
Mayor, yeah, if I may, just wanted to address a couple of things. So I'm not opposed to moving it to 58th Avenue to 57th Drive, which is both sides. I'm not opposed to that, and I don't believe that the downtown management merchants group would be opposed either. And we also wouldn't be opposed to taking it in front of Betsy Mama's there on 58th Avenue. Absolutely not. It was just never in the scope of work to add 58th Avenue. And staff didn't come prepared, and I didn't come prepared today to ask council for 58th Avenue. But I think that there's a much greater volume of vehicles that go through Glendale than there would be through 58th. And then secondly, just my opinion only, because there's been some great questions and comments. lighting up trees along 58th Avenue between the park and the restaurants could establish what we're trying to establish and getting people to get off their vehicles. But again, this council member would not oppose doing both or moving it over one block.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree. I mean, I know we've talked about lighting up downtown Glendale. I don't know, I've been here 6 years now. I'm sure it's before then. How much work would it be to scope out, just because I think the continuity, if we're gonna do the cafe type lighting, I think it's important that there's continuity. So, and if we're gonna be featuring the park, I also think that's probably important. I mean, you could still light up the trees, you know. But how much work would it be just to see how much, I mean, we've got an extra $78,000 already that we need to spend. How much work would it be to scope out moving it around the corner on 58th Drive up to Glen, or as close to Glen as we could get for another $100,000?
Mayor and Councilmember Tolmachoff, if the council provides direction today to allow all $184,000 to be utilized for public benefit projects such as this, then I can work with engineering to get a revised cost estimate. I would suggest that, or I would ask that I be provided with some direction today about should we go ahead and move forward with what's being proposed here and add the increment of 58th Avenue as an option A, and then the 58th Avenue to 57th Drive on Glendale Avenue as an option B, and see if we can't afford all of it. We just don't know until we get the design piece of it done. The big reason why we need to make sure that if we're going to move forward with the project is because once we spend any CDBG funding on this project, we have to do a project, which means if we say, okay, yes, we want to go forward today, you're authorized to move forward and do the design and all of that, we need to do a segment. And it would be helpful if we, from a timeline perspective, I can certainly schedule another workshop to come back to you with a revised scope. The problem is that until we get into the design and engineering, we won't, this is a best guess. Now, what I can say is I do feel confident, and I'll ask Mr. Bessler to correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel confident that if all $184,000 were to be provided direction to be used for this project, yes, it's very likely that we can do more than just one block.
If I could, I'm just going to make a recommendation and see if we have consensus. The block that you have up there on Glendale Avenue right now kind of blocked out that white area. If that went a little bit further east to the corner in front of Subway, and then from Glendale Avenue on the south side north up to Glen on 58th, those two sections, I would be supportive of both of those. And then for a plan B, are we going to go down Glendale Avenue, that type of thing. But I'd like to get those two done. We got the money. I think if you do them all at the same time, I think you can probably get them done rather than trying to do them separate pieces, because it's going to just cost more money. That'd be my recommendation. Go ahead.
Mayor, I agree with you completely. And I appreciate the idea of going down Glendale Avenue, but we have talked extensively about featuring the park and the amphitheater and what that could mean to downtown Glendale. So I feel like, at least my opinion, 58th Avenue is an obvious thing that we probably should do. It's really going to feature the park, especially once we're gonna at some point we're gonna be able to have our first music in the park. We're gonna be able to see how successful that is, and we're looking at making that a focal point of our downtown. So I agree. I think we should go do that rather than go further east. We can always still go further east, but we've been talking about the park being and the amphitheater being a focal point to get people to come downtown and get out of their car. So that's what I agree with you, Mayor.
Mr. Milner.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with what's been stated here about coming down Glendale and going forward onto 58th. But as was Ms. Moreno mentioned, they don't know what the costs are yet, and it's very possible that we could continue down Glendale, and I would be in favor if there's additional monies to do those two segments, and if there's a money to go all the way down to 57th Drive, that would even be better, in my opinion. And then if we want to expand the project then later, then we could still move forward with that.
Thank you, Mayor. You have my full support on this. It's been a long time coming. I fully support the highlighted block there that's was suggested by the merchants. This is a placemaking type project. It makes the statement, "You have arrived," and that needs to be done on the street that has the most traffic. And the fact that this is a 365 days a year project is especially good. And I think that's where we need to make the statement now. With the, I can certainly support the additional money that's available going into this project to get us another block or 2 blocks if we could be so lucky. I think I would, I guess in order, I would say 58th Avenue from Glendale to Glen would be my second block to add to it, and then another block of Glendale Avenue from 57th Drive to 58th Avenue would be the third block that I'd like to see added. But we definitely need to have that section on Glendale Avenue to make the statement, "You've arrived." This reminds me of the same style of cafe lighting that's in the City North project up by Desert Ridge, and it really works. And as others have said, we've seen it around the country. The idea that we might be able to get this, if everything worked out best and, COVID would stay down, we might be able to have all this happen by our music series this coming spring would just be terrific. So my full support, go ahead.
There's no other comments. It sounds like we have consensus.
So I would like to just, if you don't mind, Mayor, just recapture consensus. So the consensus is to go ahead and move forward with 58th Drive to 58th Avenue along Glendale Avenue, and then also cost out the additional expansion from 58th Avenue to 57th Drive on Glendale Avenue, and from Glendale Avenue to Glen Drive on 58th Avenue.
No, if I understood it. What you have currently blocked out right now, except for going across east to the corner of Subway, so it's not a half of an intersection, and then going north up to Glen.
Okay, so
As one
including
project.
including the intersection.
Including.
Okay.
And then the second, or Plan B, which would be addition, would be Glendale to the next block. Is that correct? And then in the future, we can see how it goes. We may be able to expand it, but no, I think we should do both north and south and east and west initially.
Back and forth.
Okay,
Around and around.
All right, thank you.
okay. Knocking them right out. Item 3.
Presentation regarding recommended city code revisions, feeding pigeons, and palm tree regulations.
Mayor, members of the council, the next 2 presentations will be led by Deputy City Manager Rick St. John.
Good afternoon. So we got a couple of code revisions that we've talked about in the past that we're bringing forward to try to find some consensus on. So we are seeking consensus today on proposed language for banning the feeding of pigeons on public property, and then as well as amended code language regarding dead palm fronds. This was an item of special interest back in September 24th, 2019. It was presented to council, and the research was approved and done in January of this year, and then it was discussed in workshop just a couple of months ago before the summer break. As part of that workshop, we were given direction to make the feeding of pigeons on public property a civil offense. So we're proposing language that states it's unlawful for any person to feed pigeons on public property within the city of Glendale as a civil offense. There will be definitions and emphasis on education first. And I should also note that these violations would have to be in the view of the inspector to be cited. And with that, I'll answer any questions or take any comments you may have.
No questions?
Yes,
Okay, what would the
Mayor,
penalty be? What would the penalty be?
Mayor, the penalty would be a civil offense established by the judge however the council saw fit to establish in the code language.
Okay, so the fine would be something we would establish?
Mayor, the fine could be something that this council could establish, or they could rely on the judge for a civil offense.
I don't know if
Mayor?
I'd want the judge to make that decision. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Is it publicly owned property, or is that what, like only city or state, or it says public property? I just want to make sure I understand.
Mayor, members of the council, it would exclude any private property, so it would be public property, government-owned.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Mr. St. John, in the material that was given to us that now I can't find it, you listed a series of cities and how they handled palm fronds. Do you remember that?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, that's the next item. We're talking about the feeding of pigeons right now.
Yeah, I'm way ahead of you,
Okay.
sorry. No questions on this.
It's not feeding the palms.
Yes.
Okay, there's no questions on that one.
Mayor, members of the council, there's a consensus to add language specifying the fine at, say, $50.
I personally wouldn't have any problem with that, and that would be a second offense. You have education first up there.
Mayor, that's correct. So it would be an education first campaign with a second offense at a $50 designated fine.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Seeing a lot of yeses, head shaking, so that appears to be it.
Thank you. So we'll move on to palm fronds. We do have a current ordinance that has been deemed non-enforceable. We took a case in front of our court, and there was language at the beginning of the ordinance that I'll talk about that made it non-enforceable. So we've made an amendment to that language. We proposed new language on November 21st of 2017 in a council workshop and did not receive consensus at that time. We discussed options brought back to council and workshop in June of this year. And again, we're given direction by council to look at a more strict enforcement of dead palm fronds on palm trees. And so we've done that research and we're coming back for council consensus on language.
Now, Mayor, are you finished? I'm sorry.
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I think I'm going to get to the slides that
Okay.
you're talking about here in just a second. So there was case law in the city of Phoenix that kind of changed the way the valley has been dealing with palm fronds. That case law is several years old. There was a case brought forward as a blight issue because of dead palm fronds, and the court ruled that the bearded palm, which is most known for the palm fronds that die and then hang in the form of a beard, was part of the aesthetics of the palm tree. And so across the valley, cities adopted different code language, changed their code language to deal with palm fronds and dead palm fronds as a health and safety hazard because the dead palm fronds are combustible. The 10-foot separation is consistent with our zoning ordinance. It's what we're recommending. Other cities across the valley have different distances depending probably on their zoning ordinances.
Excuse me, explain 10-foot separation from the ground up to the bottom of the dead one or from tree to tree?
Mayor, it is from the ground to the bottom of the palm frond or to any other structure or tree. So the language specifies that it must be 10 feet from anything else, essentially, other than its own root system, or its own trunk, I should say. So the new language changes the beginning, so it says no responsible person of any property shall allow palm tree dead fronds to be within 10 feet of the ground, a structure, a fence, a wall, or any other combustible item other than the tree from which the fronds have grown, to answer your question, Mayor. Other cities have adopted code language. My apologies, Mayor, members of the council. I think the slides that you're referring to, I was thinking in the point of view ordinance.
Is it point of view? Okay. Never mind.
So with that conversation, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but we are seeking consensus to adopt the language that I have up on the slide here.
Questions?
Mayor.
Go ahead. You.
Thank you, Mayor. So it would be basically just a code, they would get cited by code and have, time to address the issue.
We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at Rick. If somebody had palm, and there's actually a lot of dead palm fronds right now because there's so many stressed trees around everywhere from the heat. But what, if somebody had this, would they just get a notice from our code compliance and then have time, a couple of 2-3 weeks or something to remediate it?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, as is typical of all our cases, we do an initial inspection. If we find a violation, we give a notice of violation and a time period to correct. And that time period can range from a few days up to 30 days. After the time period has elapsed, we go out for a second inspection. If the violation still exists, we make notice of that second existence of violation and then eventually cite. And even after a citation is issued, if the homeowner corrects the problem, we notify the court that the problem has been corrected, and the court typically dismisses the case.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the goal is compliance. Mayor, if I could continue. So in a situation like this where it's a tree where, you know, a large percent of the population would need to hire somebody to fix this, would we be giving them 30 days to make the correction? This wouldn't be something that they would only get a few days, right?
Mayor, members of the council, when it comes to landscaping, it's typically the longer periods of time, yes. So while I couldn't state that it will always be 30 days, I think it'll be dependent on the number of palm trees and how bad the health and safety issue is. So if it's a really bad health and safety issue, we may give less time than 30 days.
So like if they're touching a shingle roof or something like that, okay,
Mayor,
understood.
Councilmember Tommelchoff, correct.
Thank you.
What is the penalty?
Mayor, the penalty for the civil offense is identified by the court.
Yeah, again, I think that we need to make that decision, not the court, personally. You had a question?
Thank you, Mayor. So this still doesn't get to the issue that residents in my district have mentioned to me, and that's that the dead palm fronds and or parts of the palm tree that in the wind, you know, end up in people's yards, swimming pools, and that sort of thing. Because in essence, once the palm tree has grown to the point that the lowest dead fronds are 10 feet from the ground or another structure or whatever, then they're free to stay forever. And every storm that comes through is dumping more of this dead tree trash into other people's yards. And that's the issue. I appreciate the safety of having it up high enough that it doesn't, you know, it's hard to light from the bottom up. So that safety issue. But as far as the nuisance side, not necessarily blight, I'm not saying, and people aren't telling me they just look bad. That would be the blight issue. They look bad. That's not the point that my residents bring to me. What they bring to me is that after every storm, now all this stuff is in their yards, their trees, and that sort of thing. And is there nothing we can do to address that?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, other cities, we looked at other cities' language and how they have their language written, and we've mirrored our language after their language. I'm not aware of any language that makes it illegal for palm fronds that fall as a result of a storm to be the responsibility of the palm tree owner. I suppose that's language that we could look at.
Just eliminate palm trees.
I'm curious if council members from other districts have the same concern from their residents.
Mayor, yes. I would agree with Councilmember Turner on this issue, that, I mean, we are addressing part of the issue, but in my mind and the minds of those residents who have contacted me, the issue of palm fronds has not been, it looks really ugly. It's really a blight. I don't like the look of it. Mm-hmm. It's a nuisance. It's a nuisance to me and my pool and my yard to have that continually falling into my yard. So I believe we must address it, or we don't address the problem. This is not going to fix the problem. This is only addressing a piece of the problem. And I realize the legal restrictions and the court interpretations, but we need to address it as a nuisance. A nuisance will, I think, address this problem properly.
Mayor?
Hold on a second. I would caution everybody, one thing is, if we're doing palm fronds, and it's gonna be leaves, it's gonna be all sorts of things. There's a lot of different types of trees out there that shed stuff during monsoons. I personally am not a big fan of the Mexican palm tree. Now, there's lots of different types of palm trees, so we gotta be careful on which one that we're talking about. Also, I think we need to identify that. The date palm, if done properly, it looks like a big pineapple, and they typically don't lose the fronds the same way that the Mexican fan palm does. So I'd be cautious that we might be stepping into an area where we're going to be telling people that you can't have a cottonwood tree because the cotton falls out and gets into your pool. So it's just something we need to be concerned with.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I agree with some of your points of view there on the swimming pool piece. But I too have concerns, and I brought this up when it came to us the first time, that 10 feet is just not enough. It's just not enough. So the way I'm reading it here, Mr. St. John, if I see, and there's palm trees in my district that are 20 feet, 25 feet, as long as you have it cleared between the ground and 10 feet up, so you just trim around it, you're good to go. That doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't resolve the aesthetics, and it doesn't resolve the fire hazard. Somebody just comes along and light that thing right up. If that was much higher, let's say at 20 feet, 30 feet, then somebody catching that on fire is not as great as somebody walking by a 10-foot section of dead fawns and lighting it on fire. So the concerns I have in my district have been aesthetics. Not a lot of pools in the district, so I haven't heard that, but I've had flying debris and then the fire hazard. And there have been some, for example, there's a individual along Orangewood that invited me to the home, and it's in the backyard, and it's right near his roof, and there's nothing he can do about it right now as it stands. If this went in place, it still wouldn't help that individual and that concern. So I don't agree that 10 feet is enough. I don't know what we're going to do, but 10 feet's not enough.
Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. Is the issue that the palm fronds are a fire hazard? Is that what the issue is? I mean, if we're talking about nuisance in the pool, then we should ban ficus trees because, so I don't know that that's really what the issue is. Is it more of a safety issue, a fire issue? What's the issue with the palm fronds?
Mayor, Councilmember Tomalchoff, the issue as the court has ruled in the city of Phoenix is a health and safety fire hazard. Blight is inclusive of the nuisance components that we've been talking about. So the aesthetics and the fact that it drops fronds or other materials onto other people's properties were not viewed as a violation of the code as far as the court was concerned. They only looked at the health and safety hazard issue.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Oh, Joyce is next.
Mayor, I almost think that it's an insoluble problem. I thought the same thing that Councilmember Aldama has. You get a palm tree that's 15, 20 feet tall, you're home free. Your palm fronds will always be more than 10 feet from the ground, or logically, most structures, so you'll never have to trim it. I don't think that addresses the problems that council members have expressed, which is the blight issue. Now, just because has the court ever had a case based strictly on blight rather than fire hazard or a health safety issue? Has the court ever expressed an opinion on blight?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, yes, they have, and they refused to address the blight issue. So that forced Valley Cities to change their code to make it a health and safety issue.
So basically, just because we want to address blight doesn't mean we can. The courts have ruled that we can't address that as an issue. So I don't see where this ordinance gets us anywhere, quite frankly. Thank you, Mayor.
I would just take Councilmember Adama's recommendation and move the height. If it's a safety issue, we can call it a safe, somebody can throw a stick of fire up that high too. So it could be a safety issue all the way to 30 feet. So if 30 feet is what we want to say, then let's say 30 feet.
If I could point out my observation, being in Arizona, the valley for the last 50 years, every palm tree I've ever seen on fire has always been because of power lines or because of lightning strikes. I can't think of a whole lot where somebody's actually held a match up and lit a palm tree. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but typically it's a monsoon storm and usually lightning strikes the tree, typically.
Thank you, Mayor. So to address the idea of after every storm, you're going to have some tree debris, that is going to scatter, and that's true because that's the nature of trees and storms. But the difference here is this is a dead part of the tree. We're asking people to remove the dead part of the tree, just like we would, and maybe we'll be getting to it next month, a dead limb. These are basically dead limbs on the tree. They need to be removed, certainly in your residential zoning districts. And I think that's the difference here. It's not, that solely is the difference. It's a dead part of the tree, needs to be removed.
Yeah. Who is here from code enforcement? You? So
Mayor, we have the code official, Tim Bowling, here.
my question, Mr. Turner's statement about dead limbs, I can see if it's a big limb that's dead that looks like it could fall and actually hurt somebody, but I don't know, do we actually have code enforcement that says if you have some dead debris on a living tree that it has to be removed?
Mayor, yes, there is in Chapter 25, another part of the code that says you can't have substantially dead tree limbs and branches.
Okay, so that brings up a good question. Would a palm frond be considered a tree limb? Do we already have the code for it and we're just trying to invent something new?
Mayor, members of the council, that was the case that was addressed in Phoenix several years ago. And the argument was made that the dead fronds on the palm tree created the beard that the palm tree was named after and was part of the aesthetics, the positive aesthetics of that palm. That was the argument.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Okay.
Well, courts don't always get it right.
Who else? Yeah, my biggest problem with palm trees is not the palm fronds, it's the little tiny seeds that, because I irrigate, I end up with 10,000 palm trees that I don't want. So I don't know, I can't support this myself. I don't know if we have a consensus or not. Is there a consensus to support this as written? No? No?
Is there any consensus to move it to a different amount, a different length? Or is there enough?
No, let's take the first one first.
Okay.
As written.
No.
There doesn't seem to be. Okay, so your question?
I would like to make a motion to amend it to 25 feet.
Second?
Well, and we're not voting, we're just looking for a consensus.
That's true, no motion. I would just ask
Okay,
for
so no motion.
consensus.
Is there any discussion on that?
Yes. Again, I've never heard of the term, Mayor, if I may, I've never heard of the term bearded palm tree. I'm looking at one, it sure looks like that. So I don't know how a court of law would rule on that. But again, I think aside from the aesthetics, it is a fire hazard. And so, Mayor, you mentioned a lightning strike. If those fronds were gone and they weren't there, the chances of that tree catching on fire are much slimmer than if that is all the way down to the bottom. So I would give my consensus to raise it to 25 feet.
Any other conversation?
Mayor? Good with 25.
Okay, so consensus on 25
Mayor,
feet.
may I ask a quick question? Is the proposal to change the number to 25, or is it just 25 feet off the ground? Because if you're looking at 25 feet, the way this is written, you're going to be prohibiting palm trees from probably every lot in the city.
Okay.
Problem solved.
All right.
Mayor,
25 feet from the ground up to the bottom of the dead from, but 10 feet apart is fine. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, but similar to what Mr. Bailey was mentioning, that just a question for Mr. St. John. So I'm saying 25 feet for a tree that's 30, 40 feet. What if it's a 12-foot tree, then they can't have any of the dead fronds at all, correct?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, if I'm understanding your question, yes, that would be correct. If the minimum height requirement for dead fronds was 25 feet, a tree less than 25 feet would not be able to have any dead fronds.
Yeah, then I agree. Then yes, 25 feet.
Mayor?
Mayor,
You're next.
thank you. Why don't we just say that? Why do we have to have a distance? Why can't we just say that dead,
Period.
they need to be, that we require you to maintain and trim dead palm fronds? Does there have to be a distance on here? What good does the distance
that
do
point.
if that's what
Yeah.
we're trying? I just don't understand why we have to say
it-
10, 12, 25. I mean, if we want people to trim their dead palm fronds, maybe we should just say that.
Yeah, I would like to give you one other thought, because I'm not trying to make this difficult, but we tend to do things. The way, if we go this route, one dead palm frond means that they have to have the guy come back out and trim that, which means they could have somebody out there every 3 or 4 weeks. And I don't know if anybody wants to deal with their residents if they have the opportunity to be cited from the city and have to hire, especially a 30-foot tall
Well-
tree. I'm just saying, it's something we need to be thinking about.
Well, Mayor, but if I may, if it's within 10 feet of the ground or 25 feet of the ground, they'd still have to trim it. This doesn't say how many that you need to have before you have to trim it. Even the way it's written doesn't clarify that. So changing it to 25 feet doesn't fix that. If you have one within 25 feet, you're literally it's still a code violation. Maybe we should say an accumulation of, 3 or more, or 4 or more, or 5 or more,
I
whatever.
like that a lot better.
Yeah.
I like that a lot better.
Mayor?
Who said that?
Thank you, Mayor. Would the council accept just sending this back to Mr. St. John and his team with the number of 25 feet and have them bring it back rather than us try to solve it right now? I don't think we're in a hurry for the ordinance. Give it back to the experts in code, and knowing that we would like to see 25 feet and remove some of the other, being next to a structure or anything. Just giving it back to them and have it returned.
Mayor?
I really would like to have what Councilmember Tomachoff said, some number that's not just but some number of how many's hanging down. At that point, you have to get it done. Or we're going to have a lot of upset constituents that are the owners, not necessarily the neighbors. So I don't know if we're almost trading one for another.
Mayor, if I can add something that may be of interest. The reason why the code recommendation is what it is and why other Valley cities have adopted the language that they've adopted based on the case law is because it can be justified in building safety code as a safety issue. So most jurisdictions have a 6 to 10 foot separation requirement for setbacks. This language follows the building safety code as far as health and safety recommendations and distance between combustible structures or items that are combustible in proximity to each other. If we deviate from the building safety code, we will have a harder time in court. Not an impossible time, it'll just be a harder case to make that this is a health and safety and not a blight issue.
I understand, but I also understand voters are not going to be happy if they have to have somebody, a professional trimmer, climbing a palm tree 23 feet high once every 3 or 4 weeks.
Mayor? I would like to incorporate both the distance from the ground and the distance from other objects as part of the code. So we could still keep the 10-foot language, but also include the 25-foot length. And regarding the cutting down one single frond, I don't see that as an issue because, and I don't have that type of a palm tree, but my queen palms, when they grow out. If I allow them to grow too long, they die. But it usually takes a year plus for that to happen. If I trim them down every 6 months like I should, they look very nice, and I never have dead queen palm. And I would guess the other type of palm trees are similar. You're not going to get a dead palm. If you trim it today, you're not going to get dead palm fronds in a month. They're going to grow, and it's going to take 6 months before they finally lay down and die. It's going to take 6 months or even a year, is what my experience has been. So I don't think we're putting a burden on our residents to ask them to trim their large palm trees once a year, which would keep this whole problem away from everyone. We're doing it through a safe means of a safety, which I can understand because the courts want it to be that way. It doesn't address the problem, in my opinion, but nevertheless, it's a method on which we can move forward. And so I would like to move forward with the 25-foot, but incorporating the 10-foot distance, so that if you have a tree that's 25 feet tall and there's a building that's 10 feet away, you could still enforce that, even though it's already up above the 25-foot limit. Thank you.
Mayor?
Good.
As you know, well, let me first say, I own 2 palm trees. You know, mine happen to be date palms. They get trimmed annually. My neighbors have fan palms, and they get trimmed annually. So it's not that I hate palm trees. I'm a palm tree lover. I'm right there with you, folks. But I guess under the logic that heat rises, flames rise, that the horizontal separation of 10 feet is adequate, because that's not the direction heat and flames tend to move. But a 25-foot vertical from the ground separation would make logical sense if we're looking at the heat and safety. So could we concur on within 25 feet of the ground or 10 feet of a structure, fence, or wall?
Any other comments? Okay, so is there a consensus on what Mr. Melner and Mr. Turner just said?
Can,
You have a
Mayor,
question?
can he say that, can he say it again so I'm clear where?
25 foot from the ground up to the bottom of the dead from, or 10 feet horizontal?
From any structure?
Any structure or other tree, correct?
Mayor, if I could, using the language that's on the screens that staff has, no responsible person or of any property shall allow any palm tree to have dead or dry palm fronds within, change it to 25 feet of the ground, and then add, or 10 feet of a structure, a fence, or wall, or any combustible other than the tree from which the fronds have grown. It could be 25 feet from the ground, 10 feet from anything, structure, fence, or wall, or other combustible.
Mayor, members, Mr. Council, I think maybe at this point, we better go back and relook at it. What if somebody has a 30-foot palm tree? My palm trees are 25 feet high. So all of a sudden, if you we got to think through different sized trees and what we're trying to accomplish here. I just am a little bit reluctant to maybe nuance this today without going through all the ramifications. I think we have a lot of feedback that we need to go back and do some more work on it. But I think the problem is I've got 25-foot palms. Down here on 59th, there are 60-foot palms that line that street. And we got to figure out, how can we write the code that addresses each of those uniquely without all of a sudden having everybody who has a 25-foot palm and their frond hangs down 2 feet, and now they're in violation of what we just said we should be doing. So I think I would recommend, Mayor and Council, we come back and take another stab at this.
I totally agree. I think the unintended consequences are going to be worse than what we're trying to fix. Okay, so if everybody is willing to let the code look at it and bring something different back to us after all the conversation, we'll move on. Okay, item number 4.
Observation points of city code violations.
trying to delete everything. Hold on. There we go. All right. May I begin?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. I didn't know if there was an introduction, if that was already done while I was
Yeah.
messing with the computer. My apologies. So this is a conversation about the observation points where an inspector can view a violation of the code. We are seeking consensus today on code language to establish where an inspector can observe a violation. City Council approved policy guidance in September 2017. Code Review Committee was established in October of 2018, started meeting in February of 2019. This particular item was brought forward to Council for scope of work consensus in June of this year, and we are back having completed that scope of work. Some code review considerations, history of court decisions, zoning ordinance interpretations, privacy rights. That's going to be the big one on where we can observe a violation from. And of course, code language in other jurisdictions is a big piece of it as well, what our community is used to, so to speak. Chapter 25, currently violations must be visible to a person standing upon a public street or sidewalk. The issue that we've run into is that we have gated communities, we have private roads, and then we have roadway easements. We have a community in the far north end of our jurisdiction that has roadway easements. Those easements are private property, they are not public. Although other members of that community are able to use those roadways to get access to their property, they are still private roads. And so the way the language is written today, we cannot enter onto those private roads to view violations of those properties that are only accessed through those private roads. And then we have several communities in our jurisdiction that have private roads, making it impossible or next to impossible for us to gain a viewpoint or a vantage point to see violations on actual property. We have about 6 other cities. We've researched 13, 14 valley cities, looked at all their language, gathered information on the 6 that I'll present in the next couple of slides. Avondale says in public view or any unsheltered area visible from any public street or sidewalk. Mesa says visible from beyond the lot boundaries. Peoria is visible from public view, which would be essentially beyond the lot boundaries. Visible, or Phoenix says beyond the lot boundaries. Surprise, not visible from the street, sidewalk, alley, or adjoining property, so it's from any public place. And then Tempe is visible from a public area. The main nuance here is whether you can be invited onto someone's private property to observe the violation. Visible from beyond the lot boundaries would allow you to be invited onto someone's private property to view the violation, whereas the language we currently have, the language Tempe uses, and even Surprise, visible from a public area, would not allow us to take that position of advantage on another person's private property that we've been invited onto. When you're talking about where an inspector can stand to view a violation, there is a plain view doctrine that comes into play. Plain view doctrine essentially says if you have a legal right to be somewhere and you can see a violation either of Arizona revised statutes or our city code, that is considered in plain view and is not subject to needing a warrant to obtain information. The other component that I want to bring forward to the council while we're having this discussion are health and safety concerns. We just talked a lot about that with the palm fronds. The main health and safety concern that we talk about from a code perspective are pools. So pools that need to be gated, where a gate has been knocked down and there's access to the pool, unfettered access to the pool, or there's a green pool, stagnant water, bugs accumulating, things of that nature that the county health would want to deal with. We take a little bit of a different standard, but visible from outside or from beyond the lot boundaries would cover us on all those health and safety aspects as well. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions this council may have.
Yeah. Why do we not use like GPS photography that's available to anybody that wants to pull it up or even more so, possibly a drone that's lifted from city property straight up and just takes a 360 view. Why can't we do that rather than, my concern is going on to somebody else's property and then have neighbors infighting because that neighbor gave them access to visibility. I think that's a really dangerous precedent.
Mayor, the first point on the GPS, those are point-in-time photographs that would not be, they would be admissible in court, but they wouldn't make the case sufficient to the court's desire to find someone responsible. And I haven't been on Google Maps for a while, I think the last photos were taken in February of 19. So any violation found in, say, August or September of 2020 might not be reflected in that GPS aerial. I think aerials are done annually in September, and about every other year the city purchases those aerials. So using the aerials in that fashion probably wouldn't suffice as far as bringing cases to court. As far as flying drones, there are very strict FAA regulations on government entities using drones for cases like this or to do investigations of this manner. We are, as a city, our police department is looking to get certified to use drones for aerials of car accidents, fatalities, exterior homicide scenes, things of that nature, as we begin to encroach upon the use of drones for police work. But there will be case law written through a series of cases that are brought forward across the nation that will help us to determine how drones can be used without violating someone's Fourth Amendment right to privacy. And to begin using drones for code enforcement would be taking a step too far, I believe, until the courts have had a chance to rule on cases of more serious criminal nature, if you will.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Of all of these cities that you mentioned, I do like the Phoenix definition. I believe it resolves the concerns that I personally have. And just as a sideline, the Code Review Committee made the recommendation basically similar to this, unanimously recommended that we make a change to allow the visual from an invited situation where you're invited in, again, without being obtrusive, not necessarily climbing a ladder where you would look over somebody's fence, but rather to be able to visualize it from, where the neighbor would be able to see it. And I think that fits very well with Phoenix is visible from beyond the boundaries of the lot. And as you explained, that would probably include allowing someone to invite you into a property to be able to visualize it. And I would also allow us to visualize it from other than a public street. So that, and there's many instances where we could, I think it would improve our code enforcement ability where we can view it from other than just a public street. But again, recognizing that, we do have to protect privacy and privacy rights, and that needs to be recognized as part of this as well. Thank you.
A question that I have for you. So, for instance, my neighbor invites you onto the property. I've got a block wall 7 feet high. Unless you climb up a ladder or get on a roof, you're not going to see into my property. Would you be allowed to do that? Would you be allowed to climb up a ladder and look?
Mayor, members of the council, visible beyond the boundaries of the lot allows the inspector to go onto someone's private property at ground level, or perhaps if they have a second floor to their home, up on the second floor looking out a window, which is a natural place to be. The courts would begin to look with more scrutiny if you had to take a position of advantage on that private property, such as climbing a ladder or getting on the roof. The courts would likely deem that to be more invasive and would hold a stricter standard to how they view that in the light of the case that you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with a health and safety issue, there may be more latitude given to an inspector who had to stand on a footstool or a ladder to view the health and safety violation. If you're talking about a collection of garbage or other blight issue, the court's probably going to be more restrictive in what they allow an inspector to do. So yes, you could go into someone's backyard, but you probably wouldn't be able to climb a ladder or certainly not get on somebody's roof to view the violation.
But you see it as though if it was a two-story, you could actually go up the two-story inside the home and then look out the window.
Mayor, I think the courts would hold that standard differently than climbing on a ladder or getting on someone's roof.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with this.
Mayor, if I may add to that, one unique element of that is in the event that that goes before a court, it is highly likely the court will want to know the observation point, and the code enforcement officer would have to identify that the neighbor invited them into the premise and allowed them to look at that. So if it's Tim has the issue in his backyard and Rick can see it from his balcony, and Rick invites me, and he's cited, when we're before the court, we'll have to say, well, yes, we saw this from Rick's balcony because Rick invited us in. So, which is not what that's not generally what we do right now as a matter of practice, or correct me if I'm wrong. But that would be a shift in practice, and that's to prove up the case.
And that goes back to my initial concern. I think that we're pitting neighbor against neighbor publicly, and I think we could run into some real problems that way.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
I concur with the Vice Mayor. I like the Phoenix language. It's funny because there have been two cases lately that have come to my attention in my district where there was so much stuff in the backyard that there were rats. The neighbors had a rat problem. The rats were migrating from the offending backyard onto their property. Sometimes it becomes so egregious that neighbor is already pitted against neighbor and feels frustrated that there's nothing that can be done to alleviate the situation for them. So I'm not worried so much about neighbor pitted against neighbor, but I do think that there are some egregious code violations out there, and our hands are tied in terms of trying to mitigate that. So I would definitely support the Phoenix language to address some of those issues.
Thank you, Mayor. How long has Phoenix been using this language, and have they had issues with enforcement or problems with citing people from what's visible from beyond their property boundaries?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchaff, Phoenix has had this language for more than 30 years, and to my knowledge, they've not had any issues.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. St. John, can you, should this be the letter of the law for Glendale, the first bullet, can you explain that, please? I stepped out and may have missed it. What would be the results of voting that item in or giving consensus?
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, the language change to visible beyond the boundaries of the lot would allow for an inspector to stand on someone's private property if they were invited onto that private property to view a violation of the code. A realistic example that I can give would be garbage stored at the front of the house that is not visible from the sidewalk, but is visible from the adjoining neighbor's yard. Under the current language, we would not be able to take enforcement action. Under this new language, we would be able to take enforcement action, provided the neighbor, as Mr. Bailey outlined, was willing to be a participant in the investigation, a known participant. If they were not willing to be a known participant, then we would handle through education and trying to convince the homeowner to fix the issue on their own.
Mayor, if I may, Mr. St. John, thank you for that explanation. I'm still really uncomfortable with this. I've tried to kind of swallow this pill and say, yeah, let's move forward with it, but I got to tell you, I get a lot of calls, a significant amount, and staff will attest for code in the district. But rarely do I ever get code calls that say, my neighbor, and you can come to my lot and see it. I've had one in the last 12 months that I know of, and staff couldn't do anything about it. And I advocated for the homeowner, but our law doesn't allow it. But at this point, I can't support that right now. I have not had a lot of calls for that. You would think that in my district I would support this so we can clean up some things, but I have not received a lot of calls from constituents that say, there's code violation, but you have to see it from my property, you'll never see it from the front yard. We're spending a lot of time on this and palm trees. The biggest violation in my district is front yard parking. That's probably what we should be concentrating on. But right now, I can't support it right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
Just to counter that, I don't know why my citizens would be different. And again, no one calls and says, hey, you have to come to my property to see it. They say, there's a problem with my next door neighbor, and there's garbage, or there's this, or there's that, whatever it is. They don't say, come to my property. They never say that. They say, there's an issue. Code goes out, and they say, oh, we can't do anything about it because we can't see it from the sidewalk. The neighbor gets very frustrated, and I know you have neighbors or citizens in your district that are very frustrated that the code cannot enforce certain things because they can't see it from the street. This is a major issue in the city of Glendale, this problem. And if we choose not to move forward then on this particular issue, then it puts most of everything else that the Code Review Committee is working on basically at naught. There's no sense moving forward on most of it, because most of it is going to rely on being able to enforce it in a way different than we currently enforce it. Changing our code it's not going to effectuate the change as much as these few words will change our code throughout the city. These words will make an impact in the city. I don't mean that we need to be Gestapo-like when we go out, and I know that our code department aren't going to be that way. They're going to go out, they're going to enforce fairly, they're going to look at it fairly, but when we have issues in the city that we have neighbors that say, there is a major problem here, and I cannot enjoy my property because of this. We as a city need to be responsible enough to take action to allow our citizens to enjoy their property. And that is the issue here, that we need to change it, because right now, the way it's written, it is not enforceable. Most of our code is not enforceable to the level that our citizens want it to be enforced, because they cannot see it from the viewpoint of the neighbor. And I strongly advocate that we move forward on changing this language. Otherwise, the rest of the code that we're trying to change, this is the crux. This was told to us at the beginning by our attorney and by others, that this is the crux of any change in our code. And if we do not change this, then everything else we're doing in our code is not going to have nearly as much impact. Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps.
Well, members of the council, Mayor, look, this has been an issue my 4.5 years here. And I think Councilmember Malnar, kind of states it. I think we are at a crossroads because, and I'll just give you some personal anecdote. One of the probably most frequently violated used to be a neighbor within about a half a mile of my house. And we said we don't want to pit neighbors against neighbors. This neighbor pulled a gun on his neighbor. And because of the way the code is written, we had to, where we could observe this house was on a private road, was moving significant amounts of dirt, altering the way that water would flow off of a mountain onto other people's yards, illegal storage of containers, but they weren't visible from where the code was at. Now, the comment was made, I'm not hearing a lot of problems about this, and I think you're probably right. We're not getting a tremendous amount. We would not use this tool to go knock on a neighbor's house and say, can we go in and check something out from your house? Just the opposite. It may not be used very often, But when somebody reaches that point and they call the city, and they can clearly see the violation, it does not sound good to them when we say, sorry, we can only observe this from the street. And they go, well, no, just come here, I'll show you that what they're doing is illegal. And our response is, sorry, we're doing it just from the street. I think you put it in place, in my opinion, not for the norm, but for the exception. When you have clearly somebody who is doing something in their backyard that clearly is in violation of the code, but cannot be seen from standing on the sidewalk in the front of the house. So I don't think we would use this as a weapon, but we would be able to have a tool that if somebody calls up and says, we've got a green water pool, we've got rat infestation, we got somebody storing trash instead of paying to have it hauled away by the city, and it's all clearly right here, I can show you it right from this window, and we say, sorry, if we can't see it from the public right of way, we can't do anything about it. And that's frustrating to our citizens, very frustrating to the citizens. So I don't see it as a weapon. I see it giving us a tool when somebody has gone so far over the top of not following the city code that we at least now can observe and then engage with them. And remember, the first phase would be to have code enforcement go out, identify what they've seen, and start working on a plan to get into compliance. And that's what this whole process is about, is trying not to fine people or take them to court. It's about getting them to compliance. Without this tool, the absolute worst cases in Glendale will continue to exist, in my opinion. And again, I know it from firsthand, that our current code does not give the code enforcement team all of the ammunition they need to really make a difference.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
What if, and I feel like I'm ready to accept the recommendation of the Code Compliance Committee, but what if we just to protect that this only applies to non-internal code cases, that it has to be a citizen-initiated complaint? What if, because that's what you're saying, is these cases are citizen-initiated complaints, what if we just had it worded that way, where you can only investigate if it's a citizen-initiated complaint? Would that work?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchaff, it would create some inconsistencies in the enforcement. Now, as City Manager pointed out, about 2% of our cases would require us to enter onto somebody's private property to view the violation. So the overwhelming majority, certainly those cases that were self-initiated, probably 100% of the cases that are self-initiated by an inspector are viewed from a public place, a truly public place. That's why we've self-initiated the case. I can't imagine a scenario where we'd want to enter onto somebody's private property on a violation that you can't observe from a public place. We would have to see it to know that it's there, or have someone call in to tell us that it's there. So for consistency, though, I would recommend having one standard for how the code is enforced.
Sorry about that, I turned that off. I'm still willing to accept the recommendation of the Code Compliance Committee. They've been working really hard on trying to clean up some issues in the city. So I'm willing to, and I agree with Councilmember Melner. I think it's time we move forward.
Okay, well, you have a consensus. I'm very uncomfortable with this because I'm just looking at my neighborhood that has acreage properties that have things that some people would consider trash. They don't consider it trash. I mean, you know, I've got one neighbor that's got like 5 boats, and he'll probably never use them, but, and they look old and they look wore out. Again, I'm just very uncomfortable with this. You know, one of the thoughts was maybe not allowing people to go inside a house upstairs from the backyard. If you can't see over the fence, you can't see over the fence. But I don't know. I'm concerned that I think we're getting a little bit too much Gestapo-like.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I too am very uncomfortable with this recommendation. Let me ask a question now. The way it sits now, if our staff were to use a lift truck, a bucket truck, right now on our street and lift it up, could you see, and look over a yard, could you violate somebody? You're on public property, so.
Mayor, Councilmember Aldama, I think the courts would view that as climbing a ladder or obtaining a position of advantage to encroach on someone's right to privacy.
And that's part of why I'm uncomfortable with it. But let me secondly say, Councilmember Melnar, thank you for advocating for something that you feel is really important for citywide. And so I thank you for your diligence. But I disagree that this change is keeping our city from looking aesthetic pleasing, because most of code enforcement is at the front yard: weeds, dead trees, parking in the front yard, broken block, no grass. I'm not saying because you don't see it, it's okay, but frankly, I just can't agree that this one item is keeping us from cleaning up Glendale. Most code enforcement comes from the front yard. It's what you see. And most of the time, the folks who call me in the district only, and this is citywide, but in my district, that's what they can see. I've not heard of anybody say, hey, the boat's in that yard, unless it's a chain link fence, and then we've had a couple of those, I agree. I don't believe that the lack of this change will keep Glendale from looking, or keep it looking less aesthetic pleasing. I just can't be there, and I'm uncomfortable allowing this at this moment.
Mayor, I still concur with the vice mayor, and I concur with the remarks of the city manager as well. This is not for the typical case, and I agree with you, Councilmember Aldama. 99% of all code complaints are self-initiated by the code department and deal with those items that are in public view. But we also need a tool for those cases that are so egregious that impinge on the health and safety of adjacent neighbors, or in some way have destroyed their quality of life. Everyone is entitled to enjoy a certain amount of quality of life. And when you live next to a neighbor that has a backyard with abandoned vehicles that have been there for 20 years and all kinds of accumulated debris, and there's nothing you can do about it, it not only destroys your quality of life, but it also reduces the value of your property. Now, that's a taking by the next door neighbor of a person financially as well. So I believe that there are cases that are just so grave that they will require going into a backyard. And it is those egregious cases where the neighbor will invite code in because their quality of life has been so compromised. I think in 99% of the cases, it's not needed, it's not required. But I believe we need to give some relief to those people who have lived for years with an uncaring neighbor, maybe not an uncaring neighbor, maybe a neighbor that has no ability, physical ability to clean up the property. But to deal with a neighbor that has for years destroyed their quality of life. And I agree with the vice mayor in terms of this may be the most far-reaching decision we make today in terms of providing that tool to get to these kinds of cases.
Mayor?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Clark. I appreciate refining that. I think I could support this if, because you're absolutely right, and I don't know why we would create an ordinance for 1% of the calls, but you're absolutely right. If I could support it if the ordinance read to some extent, you can wordsmith this yourself, but if it was so egregious that it was a health and safety issue to the neighbors or to the community, defined by the health department, one, so unsafe, defined by our safety department and the fire department, then yes. Let me give you an example. If somebody is storing oil in the backyard, absolutely. Get back there and do it. If someone is storing vehicles to the extent that they're leaking gasoline, oil, and et cetera, and it's causing an environmental concern, then yes. I'm afraid that if we use this tool, it's going to become the neighbor against neighbor. You know, they've got a boat back there, it's not supposed to be there. And those are the 1% calls that that I can support, is the health and safety defined by the health department. This is an absolute health hazard to the community, the neighbors, and me that's reporting it. I could do that, but I'm still not there for the 99% of them. But Ms. Clark, thank you so much. That was, you refined that really well.
Mr. St. John, a question I have. So you guys are wanting to do this, but not necessarily where it has to be neighbor initiated, invited to come onto their property in the back and look. You want code enforcement to have the opportunity to go onto private property, alleyways, things like that, and look without a neighbor asking them to do that?
Mayor, no,
Can I interrupt really quick? Do you mind if I interrupt, Rick?
not at all.
Just to step back, because we're talking about the Fourth Amendment here. And the concept that you need to keep in mind is the plain view doctrine when something is in the plain view. And that's the concept to think about is, so even under one of these standards, what we're talking about is violations that are in plain view. So to the extent that even if somebody is growing marijuana plants on a deck, if I can see it in plain view, the courts will generally recognize that that's not a violation of somebody's expectation of privacy because the individual is leaving it out in plain view. Similar to a helicopter flying over at 400 feet. There's a case that speaks to the fact that when you can look in somebody's backyard at 400 feet there and you can see it, there's no expectation of privacy. The problem that you really run into more is if you start lifting things. So if there's the example of oil, if we see a bunch of oil barrels and we can see it from what would otherwise be a plain view, and then let me just stay with me and I'll get to the second point I'm going to make in this concept of plain view and why we're doing this, is that so long as it's in the plain view, if you are from a different point of view, the owner would really have no expectation of privacy. So recognizing that, one of the challenges that we faced, and the one that Kevin was referencing, was in an area where they were either a private road or it was right-of-way. Neither of them, it was right of access. Neither of them are public roads, but no homeowner has an expectation of privacy. It wasn't gated, it wasn't fenced. It was assumed that any member of the public could drive up and down on this, but our code says that it was a public sidewalk or a public road. And so what we're doing is we're expanding that it's visible from beyond the boundaries, recognizing that from wherever we're going to be, it's going to be in the plain view. But to the extent you start to go and get on neighbor's property, you're going to need the right to do that. You just can't walk on somebody's property. Noting that if Rick can see from his deck that there's an issue and we're invited on there, we can see it, the court will see, hey, that's the plain view. They will want to know where you saw it from, so we'll have to disclose, well, I saw it from his house, which, be aware of that. But it's the concept of, does the individual with whom we're trying to cite have an expectation of privacy? And the final comment is a lot of you are speaking in grand terms of health, safety, and welfare. And if there is an issue of health, safety, and welfare, that's an exception. It's an exigent circumstance where you'd be able to go in. So for example, if from your, I know the county does this, if from your perspective, you look over and you see your neighbor's pool is green and you call them, they will go back in the backyard and address it, the county will, because that's a health safety issue that requires an immediate need. So noting all that, I probably didn't clear up anything or created more questions, but the issue is that what we're trying to do is it's to create a cleaner standard of sorts that if the citizen had an expectation of privacy, we'll recognize it. But if there was no expectation of privacy, so if you have a private road and it's not gated, it's not fenced, it's not marked, and there's a general understanding that the public is freely to come and go, it's okay for us to stand on that road and visually inspect to see what's going on.
Mayor? I just wanted to clarify a few things. First, the issue of, for example, in the area that the mayor lives in, where there are much larger properties, many are maybe designated as agricultural properties. There's a way to address that in the code and exempt certain properties like that from, for example, people, there's a real problem in our city of people storing too many things in their front yard and even their side yard and maybe even in their backyard. We can't see the backyard, but we can see the side yard and the front yard. And we are having a very difficult time enforcing some of those because of the way our codes are written. But we can also provide exceptions to property that they purchased the property for the intent of storing their 6 boats back there. That's why they're there. And I think there's ways for us to address that in the code so that we don't infringe on those kinds of properties. But you can't put the same standard on a R16 property in a neighborhood that has 4 boats in their front yard and 3 in their backyard. It's not the same, and so I think we need to address that. And I think it'll alleviate your concerns about those kinds of properties. And I think we can address that in our code. We've discussed that in our code committee. I don't know if what we have recognized is what you would approve at this point, but we can massage that to, I think, where you would be happy with it. Now, to go back to this question that we were talking about here, and I understand what Councilmember Aldama was saying, but it's really not the 99% of the cases that are the problem. Because code can go out, and every day, every month, they do thousands of cases. Every month, thousands, viewing from the street. Those are never the problems that I get a call from. The calls I get are when the code compliance officer goes out there and they say, oh, I can't see it from the street. It's those calls that is the problem in our city. Since I've been on council, those are the only calls that have been a big problem. Code compliance is out there doing their job in enforcing what they can see from the street under the current codes. We're going to strengthen the codes, but this particular visible to a person standing off the property has been an issue for most of the major complaints that I see and that the code committee has reviewed, is we need to address that part of the issue. Because code can see the rest of them. That's not the issue. The issue is that we get a complaint on a regular basis is code can't enforce it because they can't see it, but the neighbor does. And in those few cases, when I say the majority of the cases, I mean, it's not like I'm getting hundreds of cases. I may get a couple of complaints a month. But when I have to tell the resident, I'm sorry, but we cannot do anything about that, it really infuriates them. And that's the intent of this, is to take care of those few cases where there is an issue. I don't believe it's going to pit neighbor against neighbor. If you live in an area where it's very acceptable for you to have boats and RVs and lots of things in your backyard, and that's the way it is, then you're not going to have the complaints because it's known that area is meant for that type of a residential neighborhood. This is to address where neighbors aren't happy with where they're living because of something their neighbor is doing, and it doesn't make them being able to enjoy their property. And as a result, we need to be able to address those issues. And that's really what I'm saying here, is we need to address those few issues that do come across. They aren't the majority, and they're a very minor part of the total code complaints, but they're big ones. They're ones that the city residents have seen that we have been unable to enforce. And that's what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
All right. I want to remind everybody, in a little over 2 hours, we've got a regular meeting, so if we can step it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that was why I asked if this was a problem, in Phoenix. He said Phoenix has been doing this for 30 years with little or no issues. So You know, that I think that in itself says that we're very unlikely to have a problem moving forward with this, so.
And I'll make a final comment on your comment. Drive through Phoenix. They don't do a lot of code enforcement, and I'll probably get beat up by saying that, but, you know, Phoenix got their hands full with a lot of stuff, but they don't spend a lot of time just south of me, Maryville area, worrying about code enforcement. I'm just saying that. So, obviously, I'm not impressed with this the way it's written. I won't be supportive, but is there a consensus the way it is right now?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. City manager report.
I'll make this brief because of the timeline. If you recall, last week, we should have been hosts for the League of Cities annual conference, but due to the COVID, of course, that did not take place. Next year, it'll be in Tucson, but we have successfully negotiated with the league to bring back the league conference in 2022, or excuse me, in 22, and that'll happen on August 29th through September 2nd. And then finally, staff's been working with a not-for-profit organization called Valley del Sol to partner with Glendale Elementary School District to conduct an additional 3 testing events in the 85303. All the costs will be borne by Maricopa County. And we're also working with Independence High School to do the same, and we'll let the council know when we have the exact dates nailed down. And that is my report.
Thank you. City attorney's report?
No report.
Thank you. Council item special interest, Councilmember Aldama.
Yes, Mayor, I have several, I believe 3. I'll try to make them really quick. With regard to, and I've spoken to staff on these, with regard to tire shops in Glendale, I'd like to have a item of interest, request staff to look into our current ordinances with regard to tire disposal and storage, so the amount of tires you can store, and the frequency of disposing those from the tire shop properties. That's 1. 2, I've spoken with staff, and I believe they're going to come back in October, but I want to make sure I mention it. I'd like to have a conversation on homeless in Glendale, and specifically downtown where the brunt of it is. If we can bring back that, I know staff is bringing something back in October, we can just double up on there. And then finally, as you know, the downtown manager contract is just under 2 years away from ending the downtown manager concept. I'd like to ask the council to begin working on looking to put together a task force or working group to discuss the current management contract with the chamber, what the future looks like regarding a continuation agreement, expectations, what they've accomplished, or is there a different route that the council wants to go? But I'd like to start that conversation now rather than a couple of months before the renewal. So I'd like to ask for and I look forward to working with staff on scoping that out. That is it for now, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. I wish to follow up on Councilmember Aldama's 3rd item with regard to downtown Glendale. I too have some specific ideas related to downtown, and that involves perhaps the non-renewal of the chamber contract and the pursuit of a independent and, I'll just leave it at independent Downtown Merchants Association, perhaps under the aegis or sponsorship of the city of Glendale. I too would like to be involved in this and would like an opportunity to talk to staff about it further as the scope is created and offer my ideas. So I would appreciate it if the city manager would make that happen. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Hugh.
Nothing, Mayor.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Councilmember Turner.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
Mayor, as many of the council members know and are aware that there's been, residents have asked about renaming a street in Glendale. And after speaking with the street department, there is no process in place. There's no way that we can move anything or have residents being able to do anything if they wanted to. And so I sent out a survey to the residents on this particular street that has come into question. And the majority of them, of the people, believe that that there should be at least some sort of process in place. They don't all agree, and I'm not advocating, I want to repeat that, I'm not advocating for any name changing. I'm simply advocating for a process, similar to like what we have when someone wants a speed hump in their, on their street. We allow, there's a process that they go through. They get a majority or a certain percentage of the owners on that street to agree, and then you can move forward. And I would ask that the street department come up with a process that would be amenable to the residents, and that in particular ensures that the residents have a major part of that process, and then bring that back to council for consideration.
Mayor, question regarding the vice mayor's suggestion. It was my understanding that street name changes occurred through the United States Postal Service. So I'm not sure that there is even a need for the city of Glendale to develop a process, and maybe it's better stated that we should be researching what the Postal Service process is.
And there's been research done by the city in that regard, and it came back that the city, the post office would have to be involved. They would have to be, but they aren't necessarily involved in naming of streets. They are simply involved in managing the deliverance on those streets and having the names available to them. But the actual process is something that the cities and counties on a regular basis name streets.
Okay, you finished?
Yeah.
All right, can I get a motion to go into executive session?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Aldama, second from Councilmember Hugh to go into executive session. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it. We're recessed.